A 10-year-old girl stood in front of a registration table holding 8 months of her childhood in a coffee tin, quarters that smelled like lemonade and summer heat, while a woman in pearls looked at her like she was something stuck to the bottom of a shoe. The talent show application was already wet from her hands. The surgery was scheduled for 6 weeks out. The prize money was $50,000. And Brenda Carlisle, volunteer coordinator and self-appointed guardian of respectability, was about to make the worst mistake of her comfortable life. If you want to see how far a child will go to save her mother, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The Riverside Community Center smelled like floor polish and old coffee, the kind of place where hope came with a registration fee and dreams were sorted by zip code. Saturday morning sunlight cut through the high windows and dusty beams, illuminating folding tables draped in blue plastic and hand-painted banners that read, "Discover Your Voice," in letters that tried too hard to be inspiring. Kalani Brooks pushed through the double doors with her shoulders back and her chin up, the way her mother had taught her. Walk like you belong, baby, even when they tell you that you don't. But her heart was hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. She was small for 10, all elbows and knees, her hair pulled into 2 careful puffs that had taken her 30 minutes and 3 YouTube tutorials to get right. The dress she wore was from the Salvation Army. Pale yellow cotton with small daisies, freshly ironed, the hem let down twice because she'd grown 3 inches since last year, and there was no money for new clothes when every dollar had a job to do. In her left hand, she clutched the printed application she'd filled out in her neatest handwriting. In her right, she held the coffee tin. It was an old Folgers can, red and faded, the kind that had once held morning rituals in someone else's kitchen. Now it held quarters, $120 worth. 480 coins that represented 8 months of work. A lemonade stand on their apartment building's front steps every Saturday and Sunday from April through November, 50 cents a cup, with hand-drawn signs on cardboard, and a folding table she borrowed from Mrs. Chen in 3B. Some of the quarters still smelled like sugar and lemon juice. The registration table sat directly in front of the main entrance, positioned like a checkpoint. Behind it sat 2 women, one in her 60s with kind eyes and tired hands, the other younger, maybe 40, with salon-perfect hair the color of expensive caramel and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. The older woman was shuffling through paperwork. The younger one, wearing a name tag that read Brenda Carlisle, volunteer coordinator, was watching the door like a hawk watching a field of mice. Kalani's sneakers squeaked on the polished floor as she approached. The sound made Brenda's head snap up. "Can I help you?" Brenda's voice was pleasant on the surface, but there was something underneath it, something sharp and cold, like ice that hadn't quite frozen over yet. "Yes, ma'am." Kalani set the coffee tin on the table carefully, then placed the application beside it. "I'm here to register for the talent show, the singing competition." Brenda's gaze dropped to the tin, then to Kalani's dress, then to her sneakers, white canvas with hand-drawn stars on the sides because Kalani had seen the ones in the store window for $75 and figured she could make her own. The scan took maybe 3 seconds, but Kalani felt it like a searchlight, cataloging every secondhand seam and thrift store thread. "The registration fee is $120, Brenda said, her tone suggesting this was new information, as if the amount hadn't been posted on every flyer for the past 2 months. "Yes, ma'am." "I have it." Kalani tapped the lid of the coffee tin. "All here." I counted it 3 times. The older woman looked up from her paperwork, something softening in her expression. "Honey, Margaret, would you mind grabbing more folders from the supply closet?" Brenda cut in smoothly, not looking at her colleague. "We're running low." Margaret hesitated, clearly wanting to say something, but Brenda's smile had turned to stone. She gathered her things and left, throwing one last glance at Kalani that seemed almost apologetic. Now it was just the 2 of them. Brenda leaned back in her chair, arms crossed. Behind her, on the wall, was a poster of last year's winner, a blonde girl in a sequined dress, holding a trophy that was taller than she was. The caption read, "Excellence Recognized." "Sweetheart," Brenda began, her voice dripping with the kind of condescension people use when they want you to know they think they're being kind. "This is a very prestigious event. We have judges coming from Nashville. There's a photographer from the Riverside Gazette. Parents have been preparing their children for months. Voice coaches, choreographers, professional arrangements. Kalani's grip tightened on the edge of the table. I've been preparing too. I'm sure you have. Brenda's smile didn't waver. But these competitions can be very overwhelming for children who aren't used to this kind of environment. The stage, the lights, the pressure, and the entry fee is non-refundable, you understand. Once you pay, there's no getting that money back, even if you decide you can't go through with it. She said it like she was doing Kalani a favor, like she was protecting her. I'm not going to back out, Kalani said quietly. But if you're bringing quarters, Brenda glanced at the coffee tin with barely concealed disdain. This must be money you've saved for a long time. Wouldn't it be better spent on something more practical? School supplies, maybe? New shoes? Heat crawled up Kalani's neck. Her hands were shaking now, but she kept them pressed flat against the table so Brenda wouldn't see. I want to compete. Of course you do. Every child wants to be a star. Brenda leaned forward, voice lowering as if they were sharing a secret. But this competition is for serious performers, honey. The kind of kids who've been training since they were in diapers. I just don't want to see you waste your hard-earned money on something that's, well, let's be honest, not really designed for... She stopped herself, but the rest of that sentence hung in the air like smoke. Not really designed for kids like you. Kalani's vision blurred for a second. Her mother's voice echoed in her head. Baby, some people are going to look at you and decide they know your whole story before you open your mouth. You let them. And then you show them they were wrong. She blinked hard, forcing the tears back. Can I register or not? Brenda's expression flickered. Annoyance, maybe, that her gentle discouragement wasn't working. Well, I suppose if you insist, I do. Then we'll need to count the money. Brenda reached for the coffee tin, but instead of opening it carefully, she tipped it upside down over the table. Quarters exploded across the surface like shrapnel. They bounced, rolled, scattered, some falling off the edge and clattering onto the floor, spinning in wild circles before settling. One rolled all the way to the door. Another disappeared under a nearby chair. Kalani's breath stopped. Oh my, Brenda said, not moving to help. How clumsy of me. She wasn't sorry. Kalani could see it in her eyes. This was deliberate, a test, a humiliation. Around them, other families were starting to arrive. A woman in heels and a designer handbag paused near the door, staring. Two kids in matching outfits whispered to each other, pointing. A man with a camera, probably from the newspaper, lifted his lens. Kalani felt the weight of all those eyes like hands pressing down on her shoulders, trying to push her into the floor, trying to make her small enough to disappear. Brenda sat there, hands folded, waiting. She wants you to run, Kalani thought. She wants you to leave the mess and walk out so she can tell everyone you didn't really belong here in the first place. Kalani's mother had been diagnosed 6 months ago. Stage 3 breast cancer, aggressive, the kind that didn't wait politely for you to figure out how to pay for treatment. She was working double shifts at the diner, even though the chemo made her so tired she could barely stand. Their insurance covered some of it, but not enough. Not the surgery she needed, not the kind that might actually save her life. $50,000. That was the prize for first place in the talent show. $50,000 could cover the surgery, could buy them time, could mean her mother might still be there for Kalani's 11th birthday, her 12th, her graduation, her wedding. All the moments that felt impossible right now, but that Kalani was fighting for anyway. She dropped to her knees. The floor was cold and hard, and the quarters were everywhere, but Kalani started gathering them one by one. Her fingers were steady, even though her chest felt like it was caving in. She crawled under chairs, reached into corners, picked up every single coin while Brenda watched, and the other families pretended not to stare. When she'd collected them all, she stood up, set the tin carefully back on the table, and started counting, out loud. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Her voice was quiet, but it didn't shake. She made neat stacks of 4, pushing each stack to the side when it was complete. Brenda's smile had faded, replaced by something harder, irritation maybe, that Kalani wasn't crying, wasn't leaving, wasn't giving her the satisfaction of surrender. 76, 77, 78. More families were arriving now. A line was forming behind Kalani. Parents checking their watches, kids shifting impatiently. Brenda glanced at the growing crowd, clearly torn between continuing this and keeping things moving. 118, 119, 120. Kalani looked up, meeting Brenda's gaze dead on. It's all here. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Brenda snatched up the application with more force than necessary, scanning it like she was looking for a reason, any reason, to reject it. You left the coaching experience section blank, she said. I don't have a coach. Stage experience? My church. And the hospital. Brenda's eyebrows shot up. The hospital? The children's ward. I sing for the kids there sometimes, when my mom's getting treatment. Something shifted in Brenda's expression. Not sympathy, but calculation. And your performance track? Professional backing tracks are required. We don't have equipment for... I'll sing without a track, Kalani said. Just me. That's highly irregular. The rules say tracks are recommended, not required. I read the guidelines. Paragraph 4, Section B. Brenda's jaw tightened. She looked like she wanted to argue, to find some technicality, some fine print that would let her turn Kalani away. But the line behind them was getting longer, and Margaret had returned from the supply closet, and there were too many witnesses now. She grabbed a stamp and slammed it down on the application so hard the sound made Kalani flinch. Preliminary round is next Friday at 7 p.m. Don't be late, and don't expect special accommodations. She shoved a packet of paperwork across the table. Rules, guidelines, a rehearsal schedule. Next, Kalani gathered everything carefully, holding it against her chest like armor. She was halfway to the door when Brenda's voice cut through the noise. Honey? Kalani stopped, turned. Brenda was smiling again, that same cold smile. I really do hope you know what you're doing. It would be such a shame to see you embarrass yourself in front of all those people. Every eye in that lobby was on Kalani now. Some looked curious, some looked pitying, a few looked almost hungry, like they were hoping for a scene. Kalani thought about her mother, asleep on the couch this morning because she'd worked until 2 a.m., and the pain meds made her too dizzy to make it to the bedroom. She thought about the surgery date circled in red on their kitchen calendar, 6 weeks away, and approaching like a deadline. She thought about every doctor's bill, every collections notice, every time her mother had smiled and said, "We'll figure it out, baby," even though they both knew the math didn't add up. She looked at Brenda Carlisle, at her perfect hair and her perfect smile, and her perfectly cruel certainty that some people just didn't belong in spaces like this, and she felt something hard and bright crystallize in her chest. I won't embarrass myself, Kalani said quietly. I promise you that. Then she walked out into the sunlight, clutching her registration packet, her empty coffee tin, and a fury so deep it felt like hope. The apartment was on the 4th floor of a building that had been old when Kalani was born and had only gotten older. The elevator worked about half the time, the hallway lights flickered, and someone on the 2nd floor was always cooking something that smelled like burnt onions and regret. But it was home. It was theirs. Kalani took the stairs 2 at a time, her heart lighter now, despite everything. She'd done it. She was registered. She was going to compete. She was going to win. She was going to save her mother. It felt impossible and inevitable all at once. She unlocked the door, 3 locks because their neighborhood required it, and slipped inside. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the ancient radiator and the soft sound of breathing from the living room. Her mother was asleep on the couch, still in her diner uniform. A pink dress that had faded to something closer to gray, an apron with grease stains that wouldn't come out no matter how many times they washed it. Her head was tilted back against the cushions, mouth slightly open, one hand curled protectively over her stomach where the scar from her port was hidden beneath the fabric. She looked so small. Monique Brooks had always been petite, fun-sized, she liked to joke, but lately she'd started disappearing into her own clothes. The chemo was eating her from the inside out, carving away everything soft until only the essential parts remained. But even now, even exhausted and sick and fighting a battle she might not win, she was the most beautiful person Kalani had ever seen. Kalani set the registration packet on the kitchen table and moved carefully into the living room, picking up the knitted blanket from the back of the armchair. She draped it over her mother's shoulders, tucking it gently around her. Monique stirred, eyes fluttering open. Baby? It's okay, Mama. Go back to sleep. Did you? Monique's voice was rough from exhaustion. Did you register? Kalani hesitated. She'd planned to tell her mother everything: the coffee tin, the registration table, the way Brenda had looked at her like she was nothing. But looking at her now, at the dark circles under her eyes, and the way her hands trembled even in sleep, Kalani couldn't do it. Couldn't add that weight to everything else her mother was already carrying. Yeah, she said softly. I'm in. A smile broke across Monique's face, fragile and genuine. That's my girl. I'm so proud of you, Lonnie. You don't have to be proud yet. I haven't won anything. You walked in and put your name down. That's winning. Monique reached up, her hand cool against Kalani's cheek. Whatever happens, you remember that. You're already braver than most people ever get to be. Kalani swallowed hard, fighting the lump in her throat. Go back to sleep, Mama. You've got work tonight. I know, just 5 more minutes. Her eyes closed again, and within seconds she was breathing deeply, already pulled under by the exhaustion that never really left anymore. Kalani stayed there for a long moment, watching her mother sleep, memorizing the rise and fall of her chest, the way her fingers twitched slightly like she was dreaming. Then she stood, moved to the window, and looked out at the city beyond, at the buildings and streets and lives unfolding in ways that had nothing to do with them, at the world that kept spinning whether you were drowning or not. Somewhere out there was the community center, the stage, the judges, the prize, and somewhere out there was Brenda Carlisle, probably already telling someone about the little girl with the coffee tin full of quarters, probably already laughing about it. Kalani pressed her palm against the cold glass. I'm going to win, she whispered to her reflection. And when I do, you're going to have to watch. Well, the next week passed in a blur of school and practice and worry. Kalani went to class, did her homework in the hospital cafeteria while her mother got treatment, and practiced her song everywhere. In the bathroom with the door closed, in the stairwell between floors, in the park after dark when no one else was around. She'd chosen Stand Up by Cynthia Erivo, a song about fighting when you're tired, about getting back up when the world knocks you down. It was too advanced for her age, technically speaking. The runs were complicated, the emotional range demanding, but it was the only song that felt true, the only song that matched the fire in her chest. Her church let her practice in the sanctuary after hours. Pastor Williams would unlock the side door and let her in, then disappear into his office so she could sing alone in the empty space, her voice echoing off the wooden pews and stained glass windows. Sometimes Mrs. Chen from 3B would sit in the back row and listen, nodding along, not saying anything but being there anyway, which was its own kind of support. Kalani didn't tell anyone at school about the competition. She'd learned early that hope was something you kept private, because the moment you shared it, people felt entitled to tell you why it wouldn't work out. So she stayed quiet, kept her head down, and counted the days. Friday came faster and slower than she expected. Her mother had worked a double shift Thursday and crashed hard, sleeping through most of Friday afternoon. Kalani laid out her clothes, the yellow dress again, freshly washed and ironed, paired with the white sneakers she'd scrubbed clean, and practiced in front of the bathroom mirror until her throat felt raw. At 5:30, Monique woke up and insisted on doing Kalani's hair, even though her hands were shaking. She sat Kalani down on the closed toilet seat and carefully redid the puffs, smoothing down flyaways with gel and bobby pins, humming under her breath. You're going to be amazing, Monique said quietly. You know that, right? Mama, I'm serious, Lonnie. I've heard you practice. You've got something special. She met Kalani's eyes in the mirror. Promise me something. What? When you get up there, don't sing for the judges. Don't sing for the prize. Sing for you. Sing because you love it. The rest will follow. Kalani nodded, not trusting her voice. They took the bus to the community center. Monique was too weak to walk the 10 blocks, and they didn't have money for an Uber, so they sat together on the hard plastic seats while the city rolled past the windows. Monique held Kalani's hand the whole way, her grip warm and steady despite the tremor. When they arrived, the parking lot was packed. Families everywhere, kids in expensive outfits, parents with professional cameras, minivans with custom decals advertising voice studios and dance academies. The community center lights blazed in the gathering dusk like a beacon. Kalani felt suddenly, overwhelmingly small. You okay? Monique asked. Yeah. Kalani squeezed her mother's hand. I'm okay. They walked in together, following the signs to the auditorium. The hallways were chaos. Kids warming up, parents barking instructions, volunteers trying to maintain some semblance of order. Kalani checked in at the performers' table, got her number, 37, and was directed to the backstage holding area. I'll be right up front, Monique promised. First row. You'll see me the whole time. Mama, you should sit farther back. The seats up front don't have as much cushion. First row, Monique repeated firmly. I'm not missing a second of this. She pulled Kalani into a hug, and for a moment Kalani let herself be small again, let herself be held, let herself believe that everything was going to be fine. Then Monique let go, and Kalani straightened her shoulders and walked backstage. The holding area was a converted classroom with folding chairs and a nervous energy thick enough to choke on. Kids were everywhere, some pacing, some sitting with their eyes closed, some running through choreography in the corner. Parents hovered near the door, offering last-minute encouragement and adjustments. Kalani found a chair in the back corner and sat down, clutching her number. Around her, she could hear snippets of conversation. Voice coach says I need to hit the high C cleaner. My dress cost $800, custom made. If I don't place top 3, my parents are going to kill me. She closed her eyes and pressed her hand against her chest, feeling her heartbeat. Steady, strong, still there. You're 37, right? Kalani opened her eyes. A girl about her age was standing in front of her, pale skin, red hair and perfect ringlets, wearing a dress that probably cost more than Kalani's entire wardrobe. Her number was 16. Yeah, Kalani said. I'm Sophia. First time? Yeah. Me too. Well, first time here. I've done other competitions. Sophia sat down in the chair next to her, uninvited. My vocal coach says this one's good for exposure. Not as prestigious as some of the others, but the prize money is decent. Kalani didn't respond. What are you singing? Stand Up. Sophia's eyebrows rose. Cynthia Erivo? That's ambitious. Do you have a backing track? Because the key changes are really tricky if you're singing live. No track. Oh. Sophia's expression shifted. Not cruel exactly, but something close to pity. Well, good luck. She stood and walked away, and Kalani was left alone again, surrounded by kids who belonged here in ways she didn't, who had coaches and custom dresses and parents who could afford to gamble $800 on a maybe. She thought about Brenda Carlisle, about the coffee tin spilling across the table, about the way everyone had stared. She thought about her mother in the front row, probably already exhausted but smiling anyway. She thought about the surgery date, 6 weeks away, and the bill that kept growing every time they opened the mail. Then she pulled out the small notepad she'd brought and wrote 2 words on her palm in blue ink, for Mom. Well, the show started at 7 sharp. A volunteer called numbers in groups of 5, and kids filed out onto the stage one by one. Kalani could hear the muffled sound of performances through the walls, pop songs, Broadway numbers, a few original pieces. Some were good, some were forgettable. All of them got polite applause. By the time they called numbers 35 through 40, Kalani's hands were numb. She followed the group through the backstage corridor, past the curtains, into the wings where she could finally see the auditorium. It was packed, every seat filled, people standing in the back, cameras everywhere. The lights were bright enough to make her squint. The judges sat at a long table in front of the stage, shadowy figures behind the glare. Number 35 went on. A boy with a guitar, singing something country. He was nervous, missed a chord change, but recovered. The audience clapped warmly. Number 36. A girl doing a Christina Aguilera song. Technically impressive, but emotionally flat. Bigger applause. Then it was Kalani's turn. The volunteer motioned her forward. You're up, sweetheart. Remember, smile, make eye contact with the judges, and project. You've got 3 minutes. Kalani stepped out onto the stage. The lights hit her like a physical force, so bright she couldn't see past the first few rows. But she knew her mother was there. First row, center, just like she'd promised. Kalani didn't need to see her to feel her. The auditorium went quiet. Behind the judge's table, 3 figures sat in shadow. The volunteer had explained earlier: local music teacher, community board member, and a special guest judge. Someone important, though they hadn't said who. Kehlani walked to center stage, her yellow dress suddenly feeling too small, her sneakers squeaking on the polished wood. She held up her number so they could see it. "Number 37, someone announced over the speakers. Kehlani Brooks. Age 10. Song selection, Stand Up by Cynthia Erivo, performed a cappella. There was a murmur from the audience, surprise maybe, or skepticism. Sophia had been right. Performing without a track was risky. One wrong note, and there was nothing to hide behind. "Whenever you're ready," the middle judge said. Kehlani looked down at her palm. For Mom. The ink was already smudging from her sweating hands. She closed her eyes, took a breath that filled her lungs all the way to the bottom, and began to sing. The first note came out shaky, thin, almost swallowed by the size of the room. But then something shifted. Muscle memory kicked in, training from months of stairwells and sanctuaries and hospital hallways, and her voice found its footing. The song was about standing up when the world tried to beat you down, about fighting when you were tired, about refusing to disappear. Kehlani didn't just sing it. She lived it. Her voice was raw and imperfect, missing some of the polish that voice coaches could provide, but it carried something those polished performances didn't: truth. Real, unvarnished, impossible to fake truth. Every note was a fight, every breath was a choice, every word was a promise to her mother that they were going to make it through this. The auditorium went completely silent. Not polite silence, but the kind of silence that happens when 300 people collectively hold their breath because they're afraid of breaking something fragile and powerful. Kehlani opened her eyes, and in the front row she saw her mother, crying, smiling, one hand pressed over her heart. She sang louder. The final note rose up and up, Kehlani pushing every ounce of air and hope and desperation into it, holding it until her lungs burned and her vision blurred. Then she let it go, and the silence that followed was so complete she could hear her own heartbeat. For a moment, nothing happened. Then someone in the back stood up and started clapping. Then someone else. Then the entire auditorium erupted, a standing ovation that shook the walls, that drowned out everything else, that told Kehlani she'd done something impossible. She looked at the judge's table. The community board member was on his feet, applauding hard. The music teacher was wiping her eyes, and the third judge, the special guest, still half in shadow, was staring at Kehlani like he'd seen a ghost. His hands were frozen in mid-clap. His face, when the light finally caught it, was twisted with something Kehlani didn't understand. Not pride, not joy, but something raw and complicated and breaking. Kehlani blinked, confused, but then the volunteer was ushering her off stage and the moment was gone. She stumbled into the wings on legs that didn't quite work, her heart pounding so hard it hurt. Someone thrust a water bottle into her hands. Someone else patted her shoulder. But all Kehlani could think about was that judge, the way he'd looked at her like he knew her, like seeing her had cost him something. Out in the auditorium, the next performer was already taking the stage. But backstage in the dim light and chaos, Kehlani pressed her back against the wall and tried to remember how to breathe. She'd done it. She'd actually done it. Now all she could do was wait. The applause was still echoing in Kehlani's ears when she finally made her way back to the holding area, her legs unsteady beneath her like she'd just climbed down from somewhere impossibly high. The other kids stared as she passed, some with grudging respect, others with barely concealed envy. A few with the kind of shock that comes from watching someone break all the rules and somehow make it work. Sophia caught her eye from across the room, opened her mouth like she wanted to say something, then closed it again and looked away. Kehlani didn't care. She was still floating somewhere above her body, still feeling the ghost of that final note vibrating in her chest, still seeing her mother's face in the front row, tears streaming, hands clasped like she was praying or maybe just trying to hold herself together. A volunteer appeared at the door, clipboard in hand. "All performers back to the auditorium, please. Judges are ready to announce preliminary scores." The energy in the room shifted immediately, nervous excitement turning sharp and competitive. Kids straightened their clothes, checked their reflections in phone screens, whispered predictions to their parents who'd crept backstage despite the rules. Kehlani followed the crowd back through the corridor, her heart hammering against her ribs like it was trying to escape. The auditorium felt different now, the air thick with anticipation. All 40 performers were lined up on stage in numerical order, and Kalani found her spot between 36 and 38, acutely aware of how her thrift store dress looked next to the girl beside her, who was wearing something that probably required dry cleaning. The lights were dim now, focused on the judges' table where all three figures were finally visible. The music teacher, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and silver hair pulled into a bun. The community board member, a black man in his 60s wearing a suit that had seen better days but was pressed within an inch of its life. And between them, the special guest judge. Kalani's breath caught. He was younger than the others, maybe late 30s, wearing dark jeans and a leather jacket that screamed money without trying. His skin was deep brown, his hair cropped close, and his face was striking in a way that made him hard to look away from. Sharp cheekbones, intense eyes, a jaw that looked like it had been carved from stone. But it was his expression that stopped Kalani cold. He looked gutted, hollowed out, like he was sitting in that chair against his will, being forced to witness something he'd rather die than see. And he was staring directly at her. The board member stood up, microphone in hand, and the auditorium quieted. Thank you all for your incredible performances tonight. The talent we've witnessed is truly extraordinary, and it made our job as judges exceptionally difficult. Polite murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. We've scored each performance on technical skill, stage presence, emotional connection, and overall impact. The top 10 scores from tonight's preliminary round will advance to the finals next month, where they'll compete for our grand prize of $50,000. Kalani felt her stomach drop. Top 10. Out of 40. Those odds were better than she'd expected, but still. We'll announce the scores in numerical order, the board member continued. Please hold your applause until all scores have been read. Number 1 stepped forward. 7.3. Respectable. Number 2. 6.8. 3. 8.1. The scores rolled on, a rhythm of numbers that meant everything and nothing. Kalani watched the pattern emerge. Most kids landing somewhere between 6 and 8, a few breaking into the 9s, one disastrous 5.2 that made the performer's mother gasp audibly from the audience. Sophia, number 16, got an 8.7. She smiled, clearly pleased, though Kehlani caught the flicker of disappointment in her eyes. She'd expected higher. The numbers climbed. 20, 25, 30. Kalani's palms were sweating so badly she had to wipe them on her dress. 35, 7.6, 36, 8.2. Then it was her turn. Number 37, the board member said, and something in his voice had shifted, a warmth that hadn't been there for the others. Kalani Brooks. The music teacher leaned forward to her microphone. Kalani, that was one of the most moving performances I've seen in my 30 years of teaching. Your technical execution needs work. There were some pitch issues in the bridge and your breathing could be more controlled, but your emotional authenticity was flawless. From me, you receive a 9.4. A ripple of shock ran through the auditorium. 9.4 was the highest score of the night by almost a full point. The board member nodded. I concur. You sang from a place of genuine experience, and it showed. 9.5. The whispers grew louder. 2 judges scoring in the 9s meant Kalani was almost guaranteed a spot in the finals. But there was still 1 score left. Everyone turned to the special guest judge. He hadn't moved, hadn't spoken. He was still staring at Kalani with that same shattered expression, his hands gripping the edge of the table so hard his knuckles had gone pale. The board member cleared his throat. Mr. Cross, your score? The name hit Kalani like cold water. Cross. As in Damien Cross. As in the Damien Cross, the music executive who discovered half the artists currently dominating the charts. The man whose name was synonymous with finding raw talent in impossible places and turning it into gold. Damien Cross was judging her performance. Damien Cross looked like watching her sing had broken something inside him. He didn't reach for his microphone. Instead, he stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor loud enough to make people wince. I need a moment. Then he walked out. just like that. No explanation, no score, just gone, leaving through the side door of the auditorium while 300 people stared in stunned silence. The music teacher and board member exchanged bewildered glances. The volunteer with the clipboard looked panicked. In the audience, confused murmurs were building into actual conversation. The board member fumbled with his microphone. I apologize for the disruption. We'll continue with the remaining scores and address Mr. Cross's evaluation shortly. But Kalani barely heard him. She was still staring at the door where Damian Cross had disappeared, her mind racing through possibilities like shuffling cards. Had her performance been so bad it offended him? Had she done something wrong? Was she about to be disqualified? The rest of the scores blurred together. Number 38 got a 7.6, 39 got an 8.9, 40 got a respectable 8.3. Then they were done, and the volunteer was ushering all the performers off stage while the judges huddled together in urgent, whispered conversation. Kalani found her way back to the holding area on autopilot, her thoughts a tangled mess. Around her, kids were celebrating or commiserating, parents already planning for finals or trying to soften the blow of elimination. But all Kalani could think about was that expression on Damian Cross's face, like seeing her had cost him everything. Kalani? She turned. Her mother was standing in the doorway, having somehow talked her way past the volunteers, and her face was radiant despite the exhaustion etched into every line. She crossed the room and pulled Kalani into a hug so tight it hurt. "Baby, you were perfect," Monique whispered. "You were so perfect." "Mama, you're not supposed to be back here." "I don't care, I had to tell you." Monique pulled back, hands on Kalani's shoulders, eyes searching her daughter's face. 9.4 and 9.5. Do you understand what that means? You're going to the finals. You're actually going to... We don't know that yet. The third judge didn't score me. He will. And even if he doesn't, 2 9s is enough to... Ms. Brooks? They both turned. A young woman in a staff polo was standing in the doorway, looking uncomfortable. The judges need to speak with Kalani, privately, in the conference room. Kalani's stomach dropped. Why? They didn't say, but Mr. Cross is back, and he specifically requested... She hesitated. "Just Kalani, please." "You can wait in the hallway, Ms. Brooks." Monique's grip on Kalani's shoulders tightened. "I'm not letting my daughter go into a room alone with 3 adults she doesn't know." "Mama, it's okay." Kalani covered her mother's hands with her own. "I'll be fine. You should sit down anyway. You've been standing too long." "Lonnie, I'll be right back. I promise." Monique looked like she wanted to argue, but her legs were already shaking from the effort of staying upright, and they both knew it. She let Kalani go with visible reluctance, and Kalani followed the staff member down a hallway that seemed to stretch forever, her sneakers squeaking on linoleum that suddenly felt less like a floor and more like a countdown. The conference room was small and windowless, furnished with a long table and uncomfortable plastic chairs that had probably been there since the building was constructed in the 80s. The 3 judges were already inside. The music teacher and board member sat together on one side of the table, their expressions carefully neutral. Damian Cross stood in the corner with his back to the wall, arms crossed, looking like he was physically restraining himself from bolting again. "Please sit down, Kalani," the music teacher said gently, gesturing to a chair across from them. Kalani sat, her hands folded in her lap to keep them from shaking. "Did I do something wrong?" "No, sweetheart, not at all." The board member's voice was kind but serious. "We just need to clarify a few things about your registration." Her heart started pounding harder. "I paid the fee, all of it. I have the receipt. It's not about the fee." The music teacher leaned forward, her expression softening. "We need to ask you about your family situation, specifically about your father." The question hit Kalani like a slap. "My father? Is he involved in your life? Does he have custody rights? Does he..." The board member glanced at Damian, who was now staring at the floor like he was trying to bore a hole through it with his eyes. "Does he know you're competing today?" Kalani's throat went tight. "I don't have a father. It's just me and my mom. But biologically, I don't know who he is." The words came out sharper than she intended. "My mom doesn't talk about him. He left before I was born. Why does it matter?" The music teacher and board member exchanged glances again, clearly uncomfortable. Finally, the music teacher spoke, her voice gentle but firm. Kelani, Mr. Cross has raised a concern about your participation in this competition. He believes there may be a conflict of interest. What? Kalani looked at Damien, who was still refusing to meet her eyes. I don't understand. I've never met him before tonight. How could there be? Because he thinks he's my father. The words came out of Damien's mouth like they'd been dragged, low and rough and breaking at the edges. He finally looked up, and his eyes were red-rimmed, devastated. I think I'm your father, Kelani, and if I'm right, I can't judge your performance. I can't be part of this competition at all. The room tilted. Kelani gripped the edge of the table, her vision swimming. You're lying. I'm not. You can't just show up and claim. Her voice was rising, panic threading through every word. My mother would have told me if you... Your mother's name is Monique Brooks. She used to work at a diner on 5th Street 11 years ago. She had dark hair back then, longer than she wears it now, and a smile that could stop traffic. We met when I was in town for a recording session. We spent 3 weeks together. I was young and stupid and convinced I was going to change the world. When I left, she was... His voice cracked. She was pregnant. She tried to tell me. I didn't answer her calls. The words landed like stones, building a truth Kalani didn't want to accept. That doesn't prove anything, she said, but her voice sounded thin even to her own ears. Damien pulled out his phone, tapped the screen a few times, then held it out. On the display was a photo, old, the colors slightly faded, clearly taken on a camera that was nowhere near modern quality. It showed a young man and a young woman sitting together in a diner booth, laughing, his arm around her shoulders. The man was Damien, younger but unmistakable. The woman was Kalani's mother, her hair long and dark, just like he'd said, her smile wide and unguarded in a way Kalani had never seen. I've carried this picture for 10 years, Damien said quietly. I kept telling myself I'd find her someday. Apologize. Make it right. But I didn't. I built my career, made my money, convinced myself it was too late, that she'd moved on, that she was better off without me. He swallowed hard. Then tonight, you walked onto that stage, and the moment you started singing, I knew exactly who you were. You have her smile, my mother's eyes, and a voice that sounds like... He stopped, overcome. Kalani's hands were shaking so badly she had to press them flat against the table. If you knew, why didn't you say something before? I was trying to figure out what to do, whether I had any right to go... He dragged a hand over his face. When you sang, I realized I'd already failed you once. I wasn't going to fail you again by staying silent and letting you think this competition was fair when I'm sitting at the judge's table. The music teacher spoke up, her voice careful. Which brings us to the situation we're facing. If Mr. Cross is correct about his relationship to you, he cannot ethically score your performance or participate in judging the finals. However, he was brought in as a marquee name. His presence is a significant draw for this competition. If he withdraws, it could impact the event's credibility. I don't care about the event's credibility, Damien cut in. I care about making sure Kalani gets a fair chance. Then score me, Kalani said, her voice hard. Give me whatever number you think I deserve and be done with it. I can't. Why not? Because you were extraordinary, and if I give you the score you earned, people will say I'm biased. And if I lowball you to avoid that appearance, I'm punishing you for my mistakes. He met her eyes, and the pain in his gaze was so raw it hurt to look at. Either way, you lose, and I've already taken enough from you. The board member cleared his throat. We need to verify this before we make any decisions. Kalani, would your mother be willing to confirm whether Mr. Cross is... Don't ask her that. Kalani's voice came out sharp. Don't you dare ask her that in front of all these people. We'll be discreet. She's sick. The words burst out before Kalani could stop them. She has cancer. She's barely strong enough to be here tonight. I'm not letting you interrogate her about some man who walked out on her a decade ago just so you can protect your stupid competition's reputation. Silence fell over the room like a blanket. The music teacher's expression shifted from professional neutrality to something achingly sad. Oh, honey, I'm so sorry. That's why you're here, isn't it? The board member's voice was gentle. The prize money. You need it for her treatment. Kalani's throat was too tight to answer. She just nodded. Damien made a sound like he'd been punched. Jesus Christ.
She's sick, and I should have. He turned away, pressing the heels of his hands against his eyes. We need to find a solution, the music teacher said, looking between Damien and Kalani. One that's fair to everyone involved. There's only one solution. Damien's voice was muffled, but firm. I withdraw from the panel, retroactively. My scores for all 40 performances are thrown out, and you bring in an alternate judge to rescore everyone. Kalani gets evaluated on merit, same as every other kid. No favoritism, no bias, no questions. That would require us to reschedule the entire preliminary round, the board member protested. The logistics alone, I'll cover the costs. Venue rental, staff overtime, whatever it takes. And I'll still fulfill my promotional obligations, interviews, photos, whatever you need. I just won't judge. He turned back to face them, and his jaw was set in a way that suggested this wasn't negotiable. That's my offer.
Take it or I withdraw completely, and you can explain to your sponsors why your headline judge walked out. The music teacher and board member looked at each other, having an entire conversation with eyebrows and meaningful glances. Finally, the board member sighed. We'll need to discuss this with the full organizing committee, but provisionally, yes, I think we can make that work. Good. Damien looked at Kalani, and the devastation in his eyes threatened to crack her composure completely. I'm sorry. For all of it. For leaving. For not being there. For not knowing what you were going through. I'm sorry. Kalani stood up so fast her chair scraped against the floor. I don't want your apology. I know. You deserve one anyway. What I deserve is for you to stay away from me and my mother. Her voice was shaking now, anger and hurt and confusion tangling together until she couldn't tell them apart. You don't get to show up after 10 years and call yourself my father. You don't get to make decisions about my life. You walked away. That was your choice. Live with it. She turned and headed for the door, but Damien's voice stopped her. Kalani. She didn't turn around. For what it's worth, he said quietly, you were the best performer tonight by a mile. Not because of who you are to me, because you're genuinely gifted. And whatever happens with this competition, someone is going to recognize that. Someone is going to give you the opportunities you deserve. I promise you that. Kalani's hand was on the doorknob. She could walk out right now, should walk out. But something made her look back over her shoulder, not at Damien, but at the music teacher and board member. When will you announce the reschedule? She asked. Within the next day or two, the board member said. We'll contact all participants directly. And you'll bring in someone who doesn't know any of us? Someone who will actually be fair? Yes, you have my word. Kalani nodded once, then left, pulling the door closed behind her hard enough that it echoed down the hallway. Her mother was waiting right where the staff member had left her, sitting on a bench that looked like it belonged in a bus station, her head tilted back against the wall and her eyes closed. She looked so tired that Kalani felt guilt crash over her like a wave. She shouldn't be here. She should be home resting, but she'd insisted on coming anyway because that's what she always did. She always showed up, even when it cost her everything. Mama? Monique's eyes opened, and she smiled, immediate and automatic, like seeing Kalani was still the best part of her day, even after everything. Hey, baby, what did they want? Kalani sat down beside her, her legs suddenly unable to hold her weight anymore. They're rescheduling the preliminaries. One of the judges had to withdraw. Why? The lie was right there, easy and simple. She could say it was a scheduling conflict, a family emergency, anything that would let them go home without having this conversation. But Kalani had never been good at lying to her mother, and she wasn't about to start now. Because he thinks he's my father. Monique went absolutely still. Not breathing, not blinking, just frozen like someone had hit pause on her entire existence. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. What did you say? The special guest judge, Damien Cross. He saw me sing and he thinks... Kalani's voice cracked. Is he, Mama? Is he my father? Monique's face crumpled, and that was answer enough. Why didn't you tell me? Kalani's tears were falling now, hot and fast and furious.
All these years I asked you about him, and you said he was gone, that he didn't matter, that it was just us, and that was enough. But he's been out there the whole time? He's been famous and successful and living his life while you were... I was protecting you. Monique's voice was thick with tears. Baby, I was protecting you from exactly this, from the pain of knowing someone didn't choose you, didn't want you. But he's here now. He was at my competition, judging me, and I didn't even know... He was there? Monique's eyes went wide. Damien was there tonight? He saw you perform? He walked out in the middle of the scoring because he thought it wasn't fair to... Kalani couldn't finish the sentence. Her thoughts were too jumbled, too many feelings fighting for space in her chest. Monique pulled her close, and Kalani let herself be held even though she was angry, even though she felt betrayed, because her mother's arms were still the safest place she knew.
They sat like that for a long time, both crying quietly while performers and parents streamed past them, probably thinking they were upset about elimination, not understanding that the real heartbreak had nothing to do with scores or stages. Finally, Monique pulled back, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. I met him when you were just a possibility, not even real yet. He was in town for 2 weeks, working on an album at a studio downtown. He came into the diner every morning for coffee. We talked, we laughed. We fell into something that felt real but probably wasn't, not for him anyway. When he left, I thought maybe we'd stay in touch. Maybe it would turn into something. Then I found out I was pregnant, and I tried to tell him. Called him 17 times, left messages, sent emails. He never responded. Never? Not once. So I decided I didn't need him, didn't want him. I had you, and you were perfect, and we were going to be fine. Her smile was sad and fierce all at once. And we have been fine, haven't we? Kalani thought about their apartment with its 3 locks and flickering hallway lights. She thought about lemonade stands and coffee tins full of quarters. She thought about watching her mother work double shifts while poison dripped into her veins through a plastic tube, fighting to stay alive, not because she wanted to, but because Kalani needed her to. We've been broke and scared and one emergency away from disaster, Kalani said quietly. But yeah, we've been fine. I should have told you the truth. I see that now. I didn't want you to spend your life wondering why you weren't enough to make him stay. But now he's here anyway, and he's trying to help. He's withdrawing from the competition, so I'll get a fair shot. Monique's expression hardened. He doesn't get to be noble after 10 years of silence. I know. I told him that. Kalani wiped her eyes. But Mama, what if he really does want to make it right? What if he could help us? We don't need his help. Yes, we do. The words came out fiercer than Kalani intended. Your surgery costs more than we make in 2 years. The prize money might be enough, but what if I don't win? What if I don't even make it to finals? What then? Then we figure it out like we always do. By putting it on credit cards we can't pay off? By borrowing money from people who can barely afford to lend it? By hoping the hospital doesn't send us to collections? Kalani's voice was rising. Mama, I'm 10 years old, and I'm terrified every single day that I'm going to lose you. So if there's someone out there who might actually be able to help, someone who owes us, owes you, then maybe we should at least consider it. Monique looked at her daughter for a long moment, something shifting behind her eyes. When did you get so grown? When you got sick. The truth of it hung between them, heavy and undeniable. Finally, Monique sighed. We'll think about it. Not tonight. Tonight we're going home, and I'm going to make us hot chocolate, and we're going to pretend this is a normal Friday, and none of this happened. Tomorrow we can figure out what comes next. Okay. They stood up together, Monique leaning heavily on Kalani's shoulder as they made their way toward the exit. The auditorium had mostly emptied out now, just a few stragglers and staff members cleaning up. But as they passed the hallway that led to the conference room, Kalani saw him. Damien Cross, standing alone near the door, watching them with an expression that looked like grief and hope tangled together. Their eyes met for just a second. Kalani didn't smile, didn't acknowledge him beyond that brief moment of eye contact. Then she looked away and kept walking, guiding her mother toward the doors and the bus stop and the life they'd built together without him. Behind them, Damien didn't follow. He just stood there, letting them go, respecting the distance they'd drawn, even though it clearly cost him. And somehow, that restraint mattered more than any apology could have. The night air was cold against Kalani's face as they stepped outside, and she breathed it in deep, trying to clear her head. The bus wouldn't come for another 15 minutes, according to the schedule posted at the stop, so they sat together on the metal bench, Monique's head resting on Kalani's shoulder in a reversal that felt both wrong and necessary. "You really were amazing tonight," Monique said quietly. "I need you to know that. Whatever happens with the competition, with your father, with any of this, you were amazing, and I'm so proud of you I could burst." Kalani leaned into her mother's warmth. "I love you, Mama. I love you too, baby, more than anything in this world." They stayed like that until the bus came, two figures huddled together against the cold and the uncertainty, holding on to each other because it was the only thing they knew how to do. And somewhere behind them, inside the community center's fluorescent glow, a man who'd walked away from them once was learning what it felt like to be the one left behind. The hot chocolate Monique promised never materialized. By the time they got home, she was too exhausted to do more than collapse onto the couch, still wearing her coat, and Kalani covered her with the knitted blanket and turned off the lights. She sat in the kitchen for a long time after that, staring at the surgery date on the calendar, 5 weeks now instead of 6, watching the numbers blur and refocus while her mind ran in circles. Sleep didn't come easy that night. Every time Kalani closed her eyes, she saw Damien cross his face, the shock, the recognition, the devastation. She heard his voice saying, "I think I'm your father," like it was a confession and an apology, all wrapped into one impossible statement. And underneath it all was her mother's crumpled expression, the way truth had broken across her features like a wave against rocks. By the time Saturday morning light crept through the bedroom window, Kalani had made a decision. She didn't know if it was the right one, but it was the only one that made sense in the tangled mess her life had become. She waited until her mother woke up, almost noon, which meant the exhaustion was worse than usual, and made her toast and weak tea because anything heavier made her nauseous these days. Then she sat down at the kitchen table and said the words she'd been rehearsing since 3 a.m. "I want to meet with him, with Damien, alone." Monique's hand froze halfway to her mouth, the toast forgotten. "Lonnie. Not to forgive him, not to play happy family. I just need to understand." Kalani's voice was steady, even though her heart was racing. "You told me who he was and what he did. Now I need to hear his side." "There is no side that makes abandoning your child okay." "I know, but I still need to hear it." Kalani reached across the table, taking her mother's hand. "Mama, he's been this blank space my entire life, this question mark. And now he has a face and a name and he's standing right there offering answers, and I can't just ignore that. I can't." Monique's eyes were wet. "What if he hurts you?" "He already did, 10 years ago. This can't be worse than that." They sat in silence for a long moment, the only sound the ancient radiator hissing in the corner. Finally, Monique squeezed Kalani's hand and nodded. "Okay, but somewhere public, and you call me every 30 minutes. Deal." Finding Damien's contact information turned out to be easier than Kalani expected. A quick internet search revealed his management company and a carefully worded email. "This is Kalani Brooks. We need to talk. Are you free tomorrow afternoon?" Got a response within an hour. Just an address and a time. 3 p.m. Sunday. A coffee shop called The Grind on Market Street. Kalani spent Sunday morning practicing what she was going to say, running through conversations in her head until the words lost all meaning. By the time 2:30 rolled around, she'd changed her outfit 3 times and was vibrating with nervous energy that felt like it might crack her ribs open from the inside. The bus ride downtown took 20 minutes. Kalani spent it staring out the window, watching the city transform from their working-class neighborhood to something sleeker and more expensive. Coffee shops with minimalist signs, boutiques with single items in the window, restaurants where a salad probably cost more than her mother made in a shift. The Grind was on a corner, all exposed brick and industrial lighting, the kind of place where people brought laptops and ordered drinks with 3 modifiers. Kalani pushed through the door at exactly 3 p.m., her heart hammering against her ribs. Damien was already there, sitting at a table in the back corner away from the windows. He looked different in daylight, older, more tired, the sharp edges of his face somehow softer. He was nursing a coffee that had probably gone cold waiting for her, and when he saw her come in, he half stood like he wasn't sure whether standing was appropriate or presumptuous. Kalani walked over and sat down across from him without saying hello. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The coffee shop hummed around them, espresso machines hissing, conversations overlapping, indie music playing just loud enough to make privacy feel possible. "Thank you for coming," Damien said finally. "I didn't do it for you." "I know." He wrapped his hands around his coffee cup like he needed something to hold on to. "I didn't think you would. Show up, I mean. I thought maybe you'd send an email telling me to go to hell." "I still might." A ghost of a smile crossed his face, there and gone in a heartbeat. "Fair enough." Kalani pulled out her phone and set it on the table between them. "My mom made me promise to call her every 30 minutes, so we have until 3:30 before I have to check in." "Understood." The silence stretched again. Kalani studied him, really looked at him for the first time since that moment on stage. He had her chin, or she had his, the shape of it, the slight dimple in the center. And his eyes were the same warm brown as her grandmother's in the one photo her mother kept on the mantle, the grandmother Kalani had never met because she died before Kalani was born. "Why didn't you answer her calls?" The question came out harder than Kalani intended. "My mom tried to tell you she was pregnant 17 times. You couldn't pick up the phone once?" Damien flinched like she'd slapped him. "I was 26 years old and convinced I was on the verge of everything I'd ever wanted. I just signed my first major artist, and the album was taking off, and suddenly everyone wanted a piece of me. Meetings, parties, opportunities I dreamed about my entire life." He swallowed hard. "Your mother and I had something real, or at least it felt real to me, but I told myself it was just a fling, a beautiful 2 weeks that couldn't possibly turn into anything more because I was too busy building my career to build a life." "So you ignored her?" "I saw her name on my phone and I didn't pick up because I was afraid of what she might want from me. Afraid she might ask me to choose, and I already knew I'd choose wrong." His voice cracked. "I told myself I'd call her back later, that I'd explain, that she'd understand. But later turned into next week, and next week turned into next month. And by the time I finally worked up the courage to reach out, her number was disconnected. I tried to find her, but she'd moved, and I didn't know where, and eventually I convinced myself it was for the best, that she'd moved on, that she was better off. While she was raising me alone. Yes. While she was working 2 jobs to keep us fed. Yes. While she was fighting cancer and trying to figure out how to pay for treatment that might save her life." Damien's face crumpled. "I didn't know about the cancer. I swear to you, Kalani, if I'd known—" "You didn't know because you didn't bother to find out." The anger was rising in Kalani's chest now, hot and righteous. "You had resources, money, connections. You could have hired someone to track her down if you'd actually wanted to, but you didn't want to. You wanted to forget we existed." "You're right." His voice was barely above a whisper. "You're absolutely right. There's no excuse for what I did, no justification. I was selfish and cowardly, and I failed both of you in every way that matters. So why show up now? Why volunteer to judge some community talent show in a town you probably haven't thought about in a decade?" Damien looked down at his coffee. "Because 3 months ago I found out I had a daughter I never knew about. Different woman, different situation, but the same basic story. I was too wrapped up in my career to notice what I was leaving behind. She's 15 now. Her name is Maya. And when her mother finally told me the truth, my first thought wasn't, I have a daughter. It was, I did this before. I had this feeling, this certainty, that somewhere out there was another child I'd abandoned, someone else who deserved better than what I gave them." He looked up, meeting Kalani's eyes. "I started thinking about your mother, about those 17 missed calls. I hired someone to find her. It took 6 weeks, but they tracked her to this city, found out she had a daughter, found your name. But I didn't know how to approach her, didn't know if I even had the right after all this time. Then I saw the flyer for the talent show, and I thought maybe if I judged it, I could see her, see if she was okay. Make sure she didn't need anything. You came looking for my mom, not me. Well, I came looking for a chance to make amends. I didn't expect to find you on that stage." His voice went rough. "And the second you started singing, I knew. I knew you were mine. You have your mother's heart, but you have my voice, the way I used to sound before I learned to control it, before I smoothed out all the rough edges. You sang like someone who hasn't learned to lie yet, like someone who still believes music can save you." Kalani's throat was tight. "Music can't save anyone." "No, but it can give you a fighting chance, and that's what you're doing, isn't it? Fighting for that prize money, fighting to save your mother." She didn't answer, didn't need to. The truth was written all over her face. Damien leaned forward, his expression intense. "Let me help. Please. The surgery your mother needs, I can pay for it. Today. Right now. One phone call and it's done. We don't want your money. This isn't charity, it's responsibility. She's the mother of my child. You're my daughter. Taking care of you is the bare minimum of what I should have been doing for the past 10 years. You don't get to buy your way out of what you did. I'm not trying to buy anything. I'm trying to fix the damage I caused." His hands were trembling now, pressed flat against the table. "Kalani, your mother is sick, really sick, and the kind of cancer she has doesn't wait politely for you to win talent competitions or save up enough money. If she needs surgery, she needs it now. Not in 6 weeks after the finals, not after you've exhausted every other option. Now. She has 5 weeks before the surgery date. And what if they move it up? What if something goes wrong and they need to operate sooner? What if she gets an infection or her counts drop or any of 100 other things that can go wrong with cancer?" His voice was rising, urgent and desperate. "I know you don't want my help. I know I don't deserve to be the one who saves her. But she doesn't deserve to die because you're too proud to accept money from someone who owes you everything." The words hit like a physical blow. Kalani's vision blurred and she blinked hard, refusing to cry in front of this man who was still essentially a stranger despite the DNA they supposedly shared. "Even if I wanted to accept," she said quietly, "my mom won't. She told me last night we don't need you." "Then don't tell her it's from me." Kalani's head snapped up. "What?" "The competition. When they reschedule, I'll make sure the organizing committee knows about your situation. Anonymous donor covering medical expenses for performers in need. They don't have to know it's me. Your mother doesn't have to know it's me. She just gets the surgery covered. No strings attached, no questions asked." "That's lying. That's survival." Damien's gaze was steady, unflinching. And sometimes survival matters more than pride. Kalani wanted to argue, wanted to tell him he was wrong, that there was always another way, that accepting help from the man who'd abandoned them was a betrayal of everything her mother had fought for. But underneath the anger and hurt and confusion, there was something else, something practical and desperate and absolutely terrified. Her mother was dying. Slowly maybe, but dying nonetheless. And if there was even a chance that Damien's money could change that, could buy them more time, more years, more moments together, didn't Kalani owe it to her mother to at least consider it? "I need to think about it," she said finally. "Okay. And I need to talk to my mom, really talk to her, not about the money, but about you, about what happened, about what she wants. That's fair?" Kalani's phone buzzed. 3:29, 1 minute before her check-in call. She picked it up, thumb hovering over her mother's contact. "I have to call her." "Go ahead." She stood, walking toward the front of the coffee shop for privacy. Her mother answered on the first ring, voice tight with worry. "Lani, you okay?" "I'm fine, Mama. Just checking in like I promised." Is he treating you okay?" "Yeah, he's..." Kalani glanced back at Damien, who was still sitting at the table, staring into his cold coffee like it held answers he desperately needed. "He's not what I expected." "Do you want to come home?" "Not yet. We're still talking." 30 more minutes, then I'm coming to get you." "Okay. I love you." "Love you too, baby." Kalani hung up and walked back to the table. Damien looked up as she sat down, something hopeful and hesitant in his expression. "She's worried about you," he said. It wasn't a question. She's always worried about me. It's her default setting. Kalani folded her hands on the table, choosing her next words carefully. If I let you help, and that's a big if, what do you want in return? Nothing.
Everyone wants something. Not from you, not anymore. Damien's voice was firm. I'm not trying to buy a relationship, Kalani. I'm not trying to force my way into your life or convince you to forgive me or play father-daughter for the cameras. I just want to know that you and your mother are okay. That's it. That's all. What about after? After the surgery? After the competition? After all this is over? That's up to you. If you want me gone, I'm gone. If you want to stay in touch, I'll answer every call, every text, every time. And if you want something in between, updates a few times a year, the occasional conversation, help when you need it, but distance when you don't, I'll take that too. He leaned back, spreading his hands. I'm not here to demand anything from you. I'm here to give you options, choices. The things I never gave your mother. Kalani studied him, looking for the lie, the angle, the hidden agenda.
But all she saw was a man who looked exhausted and sad and desperately sincere. There's something else, she said, the competition. They're rescheduling the preliminaries, right? Bringing in a new judge. Yes. Should happen within the next week or so. I want you to make sure it's fair, not just for me, but for everyone. I don't want special treatment. I don't want anyone thinking I won because of you. Done. I'll personally vet whoever they bring in. Make sure it's someone with credentials and integrity. And if I don't win, you'll still get the help you need. Win or lose, your mother's surgery gets covered. I promise you that. Kalani's hands were shaking. This was too much, too big, too fast. 24 hours ago, she'd been a kid with a dream and a coffee tin full of quarters. Now she was sitting across from her biological father, discussing medical bills and moral compromises and futures she hadn't let herself imagine. I need time, she said. I need to process all of this, figure out what I want, what my mom wants. Take all the time you need. But the surgery, I'll handle it regardless. Whether you want a relationship with me or not, whether you even want to speak to me again after today, I'll make sure your mother gets the treatment she needs. That's non-negotiable. He pulled a business card from his wallet and slid it across the table. My personal number, not my assistant, not my manager. Me. You call that number, I answer, day or night, no matter what. Kalani picked up the card, the embossed letters catching the light. Damien Cross, CEO, Cross Records. And below that, handwritten in neat print, a phone number. Thank you, she said, and was surprised to find she meant it. They sat for a few more minutes, the conversation drifting to safer topics, the competition's history, the other performers Damien had seen over the years, the way talent could show up in the most unexpected places. It wasn't comfortable exactly, but it wasn't hostile either. It was something new and fragile, like the first green shoots after a fire, testing whether the ground was safe enough to grow. At 3:55, Kalani stood to leave. Damien stood too, and for a moment they just looked at each other. This man and this girl, who shared genetics but not history, blood but not memory. For what it's worth, Damien said quietly, I'm proud of you. Not because you're talented, though you are, but because you're fighting for someone you love with everything you have. That's the kind of strength most people never find. Your mother raised you right. Kalani's throat was too tight to respond. She just nodded and walked out, the business card burning a hole in her pocket. The bus ride home felt longer than the ride there, every stop dragging like the city was trying to give her more time to think. By the time Kalani walked through the apartment door, she'd made another decision. Not about Damien, not about the money, but about what came next. Her mother was waiting in the living room, anxiety written across every line of her face. How did it go? Kalani sat down beside her on the couch. He wants to pay for your surgery. Monique went very still. What? He offered to cover all of it, the surgery, the aftercare, whatever you need. He said he wants to do it anonymously through the competition, so no one has to know it's from him. Absolutely not. Mama, I don't want his money, Lonnie. I don't want to owe him anything. It's not about owing him. It's about you surviving. Kalani took her mother's hands, holding them tight. I know you want to do this on your own. I know you've been doing everything on your own for my entire life. But this isn't about pride anymore. This is about you being alive for my 11th birthday, my high school graduation, my wedding someday. This is about me not having to grow up without a mother because we were too stubborn to accept help. Tears were streaming down Monique's face now. He doesn't deserve to be the hero of this story. He's not the hero. You are. You've always been the hero. He's just someone who owes us a debt and finally wants to pay it. That's all. What if he wants more later? What if he tries to use this to force his way into our lives? He won't. I made him promise. And Mama, I looked in his eyes and I believe him. He's not trying to buy us. He's trying to fix what he broke. There's a difference. Monique pulled Kalani close, burying her face in her daughter's hair. They stayed like that for a long time, both crying, both holding on like the world was trying to pull them apart, and this was the only way to stay anchored. Finally, Monique pulled back, wiping her eyes. If we do this, if we accept his help, we do it with conditions. He doesn't get to suddenly play father. He doesn't get to show up at the apartment uninvited. He doesn't get to treat you like a project or a second chance at redemption. I already told him that. And we keep competing. We keep fighting for that prize money because I don't want our entire future dependent on a man who already abandoned us once. Agreed. Monique took a shaky breath. Okay. Tell him. Tell him yes. But through the competition like he suggested. I don't want to talk to him directly. I can't. Not yet. Kalani nodded, already reaching for her phone. She pulled up Damien's contact. She'd saved it on the walk home, though she hadn't admitted to herself that she'd already decided to use it, and typed out a message. My mom said yes, but we have conditions. You don't tell anyone you're my father. You don't try to contact us outside of this arrangement. And you make sure the competition stays fair. The response came less than a minute later. All conditions accepted. I'll set everything up tomorrow. And Kalani? Thank you for giving me this chance. I won't waste it. She showed the message to her mother, who read it with an expression that was equal parts relief and grief. Did we do the right thing? Monique asked. I don't know, Kalani admitted. But we did the thing that keeps you alive. That's all that matters. The next 3 days passed in a strange blur of normalcy and waiting. Kalani went to school, did her homework, practiced her singing in the bathroom while her mother rested on the couch. On the surface, everything looked the same, but underneath, everything had changed. On Wednesday afternoon, an official email came from the competition organizing committee. The preliminaries were rescheduled for Friday evening, same time, same place. A new judge had been brought in, a renowned vocal coach from Nashville with an impeccable reputation and no connection to any of the performers. All previous scores were voided. Everyone would be reevaluated from scratch. And at the bottom of the email, almost as an afterthought, was a note about a new partnership. An anonymous donor had established a medical assistance fund for performers facing financial hardship due to health crises. Any family in need could apply, no questions asked, and funds would be distributed based solely on medical necessity. Monique read the email twice, then looked at Kalani with eyes that were shining with tears she refused to shed. He actually did it. Yeah, he did. Do we apply? We have to. That's the agreement. The application was simple. Basic information, documentation of medical need, estimated costs. Monique filled it out with shaking hands while Kalani sat beside her reading over her shoulder. When they submitted it, the automated response promised a decision within 48 hours. 24 hours later, they got their answer. Approved. Full coverage for surgery and 6 months of follow-up care. A caseworker would contact them within the week to coordinate with the hospital. Monique cried for an hour straight. Not sad tears, but the kind that came from relief so profound it hurt. From suddenly being able to breathe after drowning for so long. Kalani held her and cried too, and for the first time in 6 months, the future looked like something other than an impossible equation they couldn't solve. Friday evening arrived faster than Kalani expected. She put on the yellow dress again. It was starting to feel like armor, like a uniform for battle, and her mother did her hair with steadier hands than she'd had the week before. Maybe it was knowing the surgery was covered. Maybe it was just a good day. Either way, Kalani was grateful. They took the bus to the community center together, and this time when they walked through those doors, it felt different. Kalani wasn't carrying a coffee tin or a desperate hope. She was carrying confidence, certainty, the knowledge that win or lose, her mother was going to survive. The backstage area was just as chaotic as before, but Kalani found her corner and settled in, closing her eyes and running through her warm-ups. Around her, kids were buzzing about the reschedule, speculating about the new judge, complaining about having to perform again. Sophia found Kalani during the wait. "Hey, you doing okay?" "Yeah. Why?" "I heard some stuff about the judge, about why he withdrew." She lowered her voice. "Is it true? Is Damien Cross your dad?" Kalani's stomach dropped. "Where did you hear that?" "My mom knows someone on the organizing committee. She said there was some kind of conflict of interest." Sophia's expression was curious but not cruel. "You don't have to tell me if you don't want to. I'm sorry if that's true. That must be really complicated." "It is," Kalani said quietly, "but it's none of anyone's business but mine." "Fair enough." Sophia hesitated, then added, "For what it's worth, you really were the best performer last week. Everyone thought so, even before the scores came out." "Thanks." The call came for her group, and Kalani followed the other performers through the corridor to the wings. The auditorium was just as packed as before, maybe more so. Word had spread about the drama, and people loved a good story almost as much as they loved good music. The new judge was exactly what Damien had promised, a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and the kind of posture that spoke of decades spent teaching proper breathing technique. She sat between the music teacher and board member, reviewing notes, all business. Kalani watched 3 performers go before her turn came. All solid, all competent. None of them singing like their life depended on it, because for them, it didn't. Then the volunteer called her number, and Kalani walked onto that stage for the second time in a week. The lights were just as bright, the audience just as silent, but something was different this time. Kalani wasn't performing out of desperation anymore. She was performing because she wanted to. Because music was the language her heart spoke when words weren't enough. Because standing on this stage and singing her truth was the most powerful thing she knew how to do. She found her mother in the front row, same seat, same fierce expression of love and pride. Then she closed her eyes and sang. The same song, the same notes. But everything about it felt different. Freer, bigger, like she'd been singing in a cage before and someone had finally opened the door. When she finished, the standing ovation came even faster than the first time, louder and longer, and Kalani let herself feel it, really feel it, instead of just surviving through it. The new judge was on her feet, her professional composure cracked by genuine emotion. When the applause finally died down enough for her to speak, her voice carried across the auditorium clear and certain. 9.8. The room erupted again. 9.8 was the highest score any judge had given all night, both weeks combined. The music teacher gave her a 9.6, the board member a 9.5. Kalani walked off stage with her head high and her heart full, and when she reached the wings, she pulled out her phone and sent Damien a message before she could second-guess herself. "Thank you for everything. I mean it." His response came 30 seconds later. "You did that all on your own. I just made sure you had a fair shot. Congratulations, Kalani. See you at finals." She smiled despite herself, then tucked the phone away and went to find her mother. The future was still uncertain. The finals were still a month away. Her mother's surgery was still scheduled and scary and not guaranteed to work. But for the first time in longer than Kalani could remember, hope felt like something real instead of something borrowed. And that, she thought, was worth fighting for. The official announcement came 2 days later, posted on the competition website, and sent via email to all participants. 10 names, 10 finalists who would compete for the grand prize in 4 weeks. Kalani's name was third on the list, and seeing it there in black and white made something settle in her chest. Relief and terror mixed together in equal measure. Sophia had made it too, along with a few other kids Kalani recognized from backstage. The email included rehearsal schedules, performance guidelines, and a note about increased media coverage. Local news stations would be there. Music industry scouts. The kind of attention that could change everything or crush you completely, depending on how you handled it. Monique printed out the email and hung it on the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a sunflower, right next to the surgery date that was now 3 weeks away instead of 5. The Medical Assistance Fund caseworker had called that morning to confirm everything was arranged. Pre-op appointments scheduled, surgical team briefed, post-operative care coordinated. All Monique had to do was show up. 3 weeks, she said, staring at the calendar like she was trying to memorize it. Surgery 3 weeks from today, finals 1 week after that. You'll be recovered enough to come, right? Kalani asked, trying to keep the worry out of her voice. Wild horses couldn't keep me away. Monique turned, smiling with a determination that looked fragile around the edges. Besides, I'll need something to look forward to during recovery. Knowing I get to watch you compete for that prize will keep me fighting. Kalani wanted to tell her mother she didn't have to fight anymore, that the money was already handled, that survival was guaranteed now. But she knew better. Cancer didn't care about anonymous donors or covered medical bills. It had its own timeline, its own cruel mathematics. And until Monique was on the other side of that surgery, nothing was certain. The next 3 weeks moved in strange rhythm, too fast and too slow all at once. Kalani went to school during the day and rehearsed every spare moment she could find. She'd chosen a different song for the finals, something that felt right for who she was becoming, rather than who she'd been when this started. Rise Up by Andra Day, a song about getting up one more time even when you're broken, about finding strength you didn't know you had. Pastor Williams let her use the sanctuary again, and Mrs. Chen still sat in the back pew listening, but now there were others too. Word had spread about the girl from their building who'd made it to the finals, and neighbors started showing up. Mr. Rodriguez from 2C with his hearing aids turned up all the way, the Johnson twins who usually ignored everyone, even surly Mrs. Patterson from the first floor who'd never said a kind word to anyone, but sat quietly through Kalani's practice with something soft in her expression. The community was rallying in small ways. Someone left a card under their door with $20 in it and a note that said, "For good luck." The diner where Monique worked threw her a surprise party during her last shift before surgery, her coworkers pooling tips to buy flowers and a cake that said "Kick Cancer's Ass" in bright purple frosting. Even Kalani's 5th grade teacher, Miss Rodriguez, pulled her aside one day to say she'd be at the finals, front row if she could manage it. It felt like their entire world was holding its breath, waiting to see how this story ended. Damien kept his distance like he'd promised, but he was there in the background. Kalani could feel it. The competition organizers mentioned in passing that they'd received a significant donation to upgrade the sound system. A local vocal coach reached out offering free sessions to any finalist who wanted them, and when Kalani accepted, the woman mentioned she'd been personally recommended by someone in the industry who thought Kalani had real potential. Small interventions that felt like Damien's fingerprints, even though his name was never attached. Kalani didn't reach out to him directly, but she didn't delete his number either. It sat in her phone like a possibility she wasn't ready to explore, a door she might open someday, but not today. The night before her mother's surgery, neither of them could sleep. They stayed up until 2 a.m. watching old movies on their ancient television, curled together on the couch under the knitted blanket, not talking about what came next because some things were too big for words. Finally, as the credits rolled on their 3rd movie, Monique spoke into the darkness. "If something goes wrong tomorrow, Mama, don't. Listen to me, Lonnie. If something goes wrong, I need you to know some things." Monique's voice was steady, like she'd been rehearsing this. "All my important papers are in the blue folder in my closet. Insurance information, bank accounts, everything. Mrs. Chen has a key to the apartment, and she's agreed to look after you if needed. And there's a letter in that folder, too, for you. Don't read it unless you have to, but if you do, know that every word is true." Kalani's throat was too tight to respond. She just nodded against her mother's shoulder. "And Kalani? About your father." Monique's hand found Kalani's in the dark, squeezing gently. "I've been angry at him for so long, angry about what he took from us, what he missed, what he chose. But these past few weeks, watching how he's tried to help without demanding anything in return, I think maybe people can change. Maybe we can let them, just a little bit. Not forgetting what they did, but making space for who they might become.
Are you saying I should have a relationship with him? I'm saying you should do whatever feels right to you. Not what I want, not what he wants, but what you want. And whatever you decide, I support you completely. They fell asleep like that, still tangled together on the couch. And when Kelani woke up at dawn to the sound of Monique moving around the apartment, she felt hollowed out and fragile, like one wrong move would shatter her completely. The hospital was 40 minutes away by bus, but Mrs. Chen insisted on driving them in her ancient Toyota that smelled like incense and made concerning noises whenever it turned left. She stayed with them through check-in, through pre-op, through all the waiting that felt designed to drive people slowly insane. When they finally wheeled Monique back to surgery prep, Kelani walked beside the gurney, holding her mother's hand, memorizing every detail of her face just in case. I love you, baby, Monique said, her voice already going fuzzy from the pre-medication. More than the whole world. You know that, right? I know, Mama. I love you too. Sing at the finals. Sing like you sang that first night, like you've got nothing to lose and everything to prove. I will. And win or lose, you're already everything I ever hoped for. Then the nurses were pushing through the doors marked surgical staff only. And Kelani was left standing in an empty hallway with Mrs. Chen's hand on her shoulder and nothing to do but wait. The surgery was scheduled for 4 hours. Kelani spent the first hour pacing the waiting room, the second hour staring at a magazine without seeing the words, the third hour in the hospital chapel, even though her mother had taught her to find hope in action rather than prayer. By hour 4, she was back in the waiting room, watching the door like she could will the surgeon to appear through sheer force of concentration. Hour 5 came and went, then hour 6. Mrs. Chen kept trying to get Kelani to eat something from the cafeteria, but everything tasted like cardboard and fear. The other families in the waiting room became familiar, the elderly couple holding hands in the corner, the young man with his head in his hands, the woman who kept making phone calls in a language Kelani didn't recognize. At hour 7, Kelani pulled out her phone, not sure what she was looking for. Her hand hovered over Damien's contact. He'd said she could call anytime, day or night, but what would she even say? My mother's surgery is taking too long and I'm terrified and I need someone to tell me it's going to be okay even if that's a lie? Before she could decide, the surgical waiting room door opened and a doctor in blue scrubs stepped through, pulling down her mask. Family of Monique Brooks? Kelani shot to her feet so fast she nearly knocked over her chair. That's me. I'm her daughter. The doctor's expression was professionally neutral in a way that made Kelani's heart stop. Let's talk in the consultation room. Just tell me if she's alive. Something softened in the doctor's face. She's alive. She made it through surgery, but there were some complications we need to discuss. The consultation room was small and sterile, with a box of tissues on the table that had clearly seen a lot of use. Kelani sat down with Mrs. Chen beside her, hands gripped together so tightly her knuckles had gone white. The surgery itself went well, the doctor began, settling into the chair across from them. We were able to remove the primary tumor and all visible cancerous tissue. However, once we got inside, we discovered the cancer had spread slightly more than the scans indicated. There was involvement in one of the lymph nodes we hadn't anticipated. Kelani's stomach dropped. What does that mean? It means your mother's going to need more aggressive follow-up treatment than we originally planned. More chemotherapy, possibly radiation. Her recovery timeline is going to be longer and harder than we hoped. The doctor's voice was gentle but honest. The good news is we got everything we could see. The tissue we removed is going to pathology, and we'll know more in a few days about next steps. But your mother is a fighter. She made it through a very difficult surgery, and she's stable in recovery now. Can I see her? She's still heavily sedated, but yes. Give us about 30 minutes to get her settled in the ICU, then someone will come get you. The longest 30 minutes of Kelani's life crawled by while she and Mrs. Chen sat in silence, both processing what they'd heard. More treatment, longer recovery. A fight that was supposed to be ending but was apparently just getting started. When the nurse finally came to get them, Kelani followed on legs that didn't feel steady. The ICU was all beeping machines and hushed voices, curtained areas where lives hung in balance. They led her to Bay 7, and there was her mother.
Monique looked so small in that hospital bed, surrounded by tubes and wires and machines tracking things Kalani didn't understand. Her face was pale, her lips dry, her chest rising and falling in rhythm with the ventilator that was breathing for her. But she was alive, damaged and drugged and fighting, but alive. Kalani pulled a chair up beside the bed and took her mother's hand carefully, mindful of the IV line. "Hey, Mama, I'm here. You did it. You made it through." Monique didn't respond, lost somewhere in medicated sleep, but Kalani kept talking anyway. She told her about Mrs. Chen's terrible driving and the nice nurse who'd offered her juice and the doctor who'd said she was a fighter. She talked until her voice went hoarse, filling the space with sound so the machines wouldn't be the only thing breaking the silence. Hours passed. Mrs. Chen eventually left to check on the apartment and feed Kalani's cat, promising to come back in the morning. The ICU visiting hours ended, but the nurses took pity on Kalani and let her stay, bringing her a blanket and a pillow so she could curl up in the chair beside her mother's bed. Somewhere around midnight, Kalani's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number that she almost deleted before recognizing the area code. Nashville. Damien. "I heard about the surgery complications. I'm so sorry. Is there anything you need?" Kalani stared at the message for a long time. Part of her wanted to ignore it, to keep him at the distance they'd established. But another part, the part that was scared and exhausted and desperately needed someone to understand, started typing before she could talk herself out of it. "She's alive, but it's worse than they thought. More chemo, longer recovery. I don't know how much more she can take." The response came almost immediately. "Your mother is stronger than you know. She raised you alone while battling cancer. She's already survived impossible things. She'll survive this too." "How do you know?" "Because she has you, and you're the kind of reason people fight for." Kalani's eyes burned with tears she'd been holding back for hours. She wiped them away angrily, refusing to break down in the ICU where strangers could see. "The finals are in 2 weeks. I don't know if I can compete if she's still in the hospital." "Then don't. Your mother's health is more important than any competition. But the prize money is already handled, remember? The medical fund covers everything: surgery, treatment, recovery, all of it. You don't need to win anymore, Kalani. You can just sing because you love it." The truth of that settled over her like a weight lifting. She didn't have to carry this anymore. Didn't have to perform like her mother's life depended on it. The burden she'd been shouldering for months was gone, dissolved by anonymous money from a man who owed them everything and was finally trying to pay. "Thank you," she typed, "for all of it. I know I haven't said it enough, but thank you. You don't owe me gratitude. You owe me nothing. But I'm glad I could help. Get some rest, Kalani. Tomorrow will be better." She put the phone away and curled deeper into the chair, watching her mother breathe with mechanical assistance, counting each rise and fall like a promise. Eventually, exhaustion pulled her under into fitful sleep filled with dreams of stages and surgeries and songs she couldn't quite remember. The next 10 days blurred together in a pattern of hospital visits and careful hope. Monique came off the ventilator after 48 hours and opened her eyes to find Kalani there, still keeping vigil. Her first words were, "Did I miss the finals?" And Kalani laughed through tears, assuring her there were still 2 weeks to go. Recovery was brutal. Monique was in pain despite the medication, exhausted despite sleeping 18 hours a day, frustrated by how weak her body had become. But she was alive and conscious and fighting, which was more than they'd been guaranteed. The pathology results came back on day 5. The margins were clear. They'd gotten all the visible cancer. But the lymph node involvement meant Monique would need 4 more months of chemotherapy starting as soon as she was strong enough. The oncologist laid out the timeline with practiced compassion, and Monique listened with the kind of grim determination that had carried her through the past 6 months. 4 more months I can do, she said after the doctor left. 4 more months and then I'm done. I get to watch you grow up without this hanging over us. We can do anything for 4 months, Kalani agreed, even though her heart was breaking at the thought of watching her mother go through this again. On day 7, Monique was moved out of ICU into a regular recovery room. She could have visitors now beyond just immediate family, and the tiny space filled up fast. Mrs. Chen bringing homemade soup, co-workers from the diner stopping by with flowers and gossip, neighbors Kalani barely knew showing up to say they were praying for her, or thinking of her, or whatever people said when they didn't know what else to offer. Pastor Williams came by on day 8 and sat with Monique for an hour, talking about faith and fear and how sometimes surviving was its own kind of miracle. Kehlani sat in the corner listening, and when the pastor asked if she wanted to pray together, she surprised herself by saying yes. The competition organizers sent a fruit basket on day 9 with a card signed by all the other finalists, including Sophia, who'd written a personal note at the bottom saying, "Kick cancer's ass, then come watch your daughter kick ours." It made Monique laugh so hard she pulled her stitches and had to be checked by a nurse, but she said it was worth it. On day 10, the hospital social worker came by to discuss discharge planning. Monique would need home health care for the first 2 weeks, physical therapy to rebuild her strength, careful monitoring of her surgical sites. The caseworker from the Medical Assistance Fund had already arranged everything, the social worker explained, including equipment for the apartment and a visiting nurse schedule. Whoever set up that fund really thought of everything, the social worker said, reviewing the notes. I've never seen such comprehensive coverage for a community program. Kehlani and Monique exchanged glances but said nothing. That afternoon, with Monique dozing and the room finally quiet, Kehlani pulled out her phone and composed a text she'd been thinking about for days. "My mom's coming home tomorrow. She's going to be okay. I wanted you to know." Damien's response was almost instant, like he'd been waiting. "That's the best news I've had in years. Thank you for telling me." Kehlani hesitated, then added, "The finals are in 4 days. She's insisting on coming even though she should be resting. I'm going to compete. Not for the money anymore, just because I want to finish what I started. That's exactly the right reason. Can I come watch?" The question sat on the screen between them, loaded with implications. Kehlani thought about her mother's words. Maybe we can let them change, just a little bit. She thought about Damien keeping his promise, staying distant but supportive, helping without demanding credit. She thought about what it might mean to have him there, to perform knowing her father was in the audience for the first time in her life. "Okay," she typed before she could overthink it. "But not as a judge, just as someone in the crowd. I can do that. I'll get a seat in the back. You won't even know I'm there unless you want to." "Thank you." "No, Kehlani. Thank you for giving me a chance to be part of this, even in the smallest way. It means more than you know." She put the phone away and went back to watching her mother sleep, and for the first time in weeks, the weight in her chest felt lighter. Monique came home the next day to an apartment that had been transformed by their community. Someone had deep cleaned everything while they were at the hospital. The fridge was stocked with meals and labeled containers. A medical bed had been set up in the living room because the stairs to the bedroom were too much for now. There were flowers on every surface and cards taped to the walls, and a banner Mrs. Chen had made that said, "Welcome Home Warrior," in hand-painted letters. Monique cried when she saw it, good tears this time, the kind that came from being reminded you weren't alone even when you felt isolated by pain. The next 3 days were careful and quiet. The visiting nurse came twice a day. Monique slept more than she was awake. Kehlani practiced in whispers, running through her song in the bathroom with the door closed so she wouldn't disturb her mother's rest. She could feel the finals approaching like a storm on the horizon, exciting and terrifying in equal measure. The morning of the competition, Monique woke up more alert than she'd been since the surgery. "Today's the day," she said, her voice still raspy but stronger. "You ready?" "I think so, but Mama, you don't have to come. You should rest." "I'm coming." Monique's tone left no room for argument. "I didn't fight through surgery and hell just to miss watching my daughter shine. Besides, the visiting nurse already cleared me for one outing as long as I'm in the wheelchair and don't overdo it." "You got the nurse to clear you?" "I can be very persuasive when motivated." Monique smiled, and even though she was pale and weak and clearly in pain, there was steel in her expression. "Now help me get dressed. I'm not showing up to this thing in a hospital gown." They took a taxi to the community center, splurging on the expense because the bus was out of the question. Kehlani pushed her mother's wheelchair through the doors, and the change in atmosphere was immediate. The finals were a different beast than the preliminaries. Professional lighting, a larger crowd, news cameras in the back, actual stage managers with headsets coordinating everything. Brenda Carlisle was at the registration table again, but when she saw Kehlani approaching with her mother in a wheelchair, something shifted in her expression. Shame, maybe. or recognition of how badly she'd misjudged the situation. "Number 37, Kalani said, keeping her voice level. "Kalani Brooks, checking in." Brenda looked down at her paperwork, then back up at Kalani. "You're all set. Your performance slot is 7th out of 10. She paused, then added quietly, "I heard about your mother's surgery. I'm glad she's okay." It wasn't an apology. It wasn't enough to erase the humiliation of that first day, but it was something. "Thank you," Kalani said, because her mother had taught her that grace cost nothing and sometimes changed everything. She wheeled Monique to the reserved seating section where a spot had been marked for wheelchair access. Mrs. Chen was already there, having arrived early to claim seats. Miss Rodriguez was there too, along with Pastor Williams and half the congregation from their church. The neighbors from their building filled an entire row. Even the Johnson twins had shown up, looking uncomfortable in clothes that were clearly borrowed, but there nonetheless. "Your whole world came out for you," Monique said, taking it all in with shining eyes. "Our whole world," Kalani corrected. "They're here for both of us." Backstage was controlled chaos. The other finalists were running through last-minute warm-ups, parents making final adjustments to costumes, stage managers calling positions. Kalani found a corner and closed her eyes, centering herself the way she'd practiced. "Hey!" She opened her eyes to find Sophia standing there, looking nervous in a dress that probably cost more than Kalani's entire wardrobe, but with an expression that was genuinely kind. "I just wanted to say, break a leg out there. You deserve this." "So do you," Kalani said, meaning it. "Maybe, but you need it more, and that matters." Sophia smiled. "Besides, I've got backup plans. This is just one competition. For you, it feels like everything." "It was," Kalani admitted, "but not anymore. Now it's just something I want. That's enough." The show started at 7 p.m. sharp. The first performer was a boy with an opera-trained voice that was technically flawless but emotionally cold. The second was better, a girl doing something contemporary and powerful that got the crowd going. Third was forgettable. Fourth was excellent. By the time they called number 5, Kalani's hands were shaking. Number 6 was Sophia, and she was spectacular, polished and professional, and every note perfectly controlled. The applause was thunderous. Then it was Kalani's turn. She walked onto that stage one more time, and this time she let herself really see it. The lights that had seemed so harsh before now felt like warmth. The crowd that had felt like judgment now felt like support. And somewhere in the back, keeping his promise to stay invisible, was a man who'd failed her once, but was learning how to show up. The music started, a simple piano track she'd chosen because it left space for her voice to breathe. And then Kalani sang. She sang for her mother, fighting in a wheelchair in the front row. She sang for their community that had carried them when they couldn't walk alone. She sang for the girl she'd been 3 months ago with a coffee tin full of quarters and a desperate dream. And she sang for herself, for the voice she'd found in hospital stairwells and church sanctuaries, the strength she'd discovered in the worst circumstances, the person she was becoming through fire and fear. The song built and built, each note layering on the last until the whole auditorium felt like it was vibrating with something bigger than music. Kalani poured everything into it, all her anger and hope and terror and love, and when she hit the final note, she held it until her lungs were completely empty and her vision started to blur. Then she let go. The silence that followed lasted maybe 2 seconds. Then the entire room exploded. The standing ovation was instant and overwhelming, people on their feet screaming and crying and cheering like they'd just witnessed something sacred. In the front row, Monique was sobbing, reaching up even though Kalani was too far away to touch. Mrs. Chen had her arm around Monique's shoulders, crying too. The whole congregation was on their feet. Even the news camera operators had lowered their equipment to just watch. Kalani bowed, tears streaming down her face, and walked off stage into chaos. People were hugging her, congratulating her, telling her she'd already won regardless of what the judges said. But Kalani barely heard them. She just wanted to get to her mother. The remaining 3 performers did their best, but the room had already made its choice. When all 10 finalists were called back on stage for scoring, Kalani could feel the energy shift, anticipation so thick it was hard to breathe. The judges deliberated for less than 5 minutes. Then they returned to their table, and the head judge, a different person than the preliminaries, someone with actual industry credibility, stood with the microphone. "This was the most difficult decision we've had to make in the 15-year history of this competition," she began. "Every performer tonight brought exceptional talent and heart, but one performance transcended technique. One voice reminded us why music matters, because it connects us to our humanity, to our struggles, to our hope." Kalani's heart was pounding so hard she thought everyone could hear it. The winner of this year's Riverside Community Talent Show and the recipient of the $50,000 grand prize is number 37, Kalani Brooks. The world tilted sideways. Someone was screaming, maybe Kalani, maybe the crowd, maybe everyone all at once. Hands pushed her forward toward the judge's table, where a trophy and an oversized check were waiting. The head judge was saying something about her performance being the highest scored in competition history, but Kalani couldn't process the words. All she could see was her mother in the front row, crying and laughing and looking more alive than she had in months. All she could feel was the weight lifting, the fear receding, the future opening up like a door she'd been pushing against that had finally swung wide. She'd won. Against all odds, against every obstacle, against a world that had tried to tell her she didn't belong, she'd won. And somewhere in the back of that auditorium, hidden in the crowd where he'd promised to stay, Damian Cross was on his feet applauding his daughter's victory, tears streaming down his face, finally understanding what he'd missed and what he'd been given a chance to witness. The trophy was heavier than Kalani expected, solid brass that caught the stage lights and threw them back in fractured rainbows. She held it with both hands while cameras flashed and the crowd roared, but all she wanted was to get off this stage and get to her mother. The moment the official photos were done, she handed the trophy to a volunteer and ran, down the stage steps and through the crowd to where Monique sat in her wheelchair, face wet with tears and radiant with joy. "You did it, baby," Monique whispered as Kalani dropped to her knees beside the chair, wrapping her arms around her mother as carefully as she could while still holding on like her life depended on it. "You actually did it." "We did it," Kalani corrected, her voice muffled against her mother's shoulder. "Everything I did up there was because of you." They stayed like that while the auditorium celebrated around them. Two people who'd been fighting alone for so long finally able to breathe. Mrs. Chen was crying openly, and Pastor Williams was leading the church contingent in a spontaneous hymn of gratitude that was beautiful and completely out of place, but somehow perfect anyway. The neighbors were chanting Kalani's name. Even the Johnson twins were smiling. Eventually, the stage manager appeared with paperwork that needed signatures, prize acceptance forms, tax documents, publicity release agreements. The check presentation would happen in 30 minutes, they explained, followed by media interviews and official photos. Kalani nodded, understanding the mechanics of victory even as her brain still struggled to accept that it was real. "I need to stay for the official stuff," she told her mother. "But you should go home. You've been out too long already and I can see you're exhausted." "I'm not leaving before I see you get that check," Monique said firmly, though her hands were shaking from fatigue. 30 more minutes won't kill me." "Mama sent 30 minutes, Lonnie. Let me have this." So they stayed, and when they called Kalani back to the stage for the official check presentation, Monique insisted on wheeling herself to the front where she could see everything clearly. The oversized check had Kalani's name printed in bold letters, $50,000, and holding it felt surreal, like she was watching someone else's life unfold. The head judge made a short speech about raw talent and emotional authenticity. The competition organizers thanked their sponsors. A photographer from the local paper snapped photos from every conceivable angle. And through it all, Kalani kept glancing at her mother, needing to confirm this wasn't a dream. When the official proceedings finally ended, the real chaos began. Everyone wanted to talk to her, reporters asking about her background, audience members wanting autographs, other performers offering congratulations tinged with envy. Kalani answered questions on autopilot, her publicist's smile firmly in place, but her attention kept drifting to Monique, who was visibly wilting in her wheelchair. "That's enough," Mrs. Chen announced after the third reporter in a row. "The child needs to take her mother home. You want more interviews? You can schedule them properly through the family." The reporters looked ready to argue until they saw Monique's condition.
The pallor, the trembling, the way she was gripping the wheelchair arms like it was the only thing keeping her upright. The crowd parted, and Kaylani wheeled her mother toward the exit, Mrs. Chen running interference behind them. They were almost to the door when a voice called out, "Kaylani, wait!" She turned to find Damien standing a few feet away, keeping a respectful distance but clearly wanting to approach. He looked different than he had at the coffee shop, less polished, more raw. His eyes were still red from crying, and his hands were shoved deep in his pockets like he didn't trust what they might do otherwise. "I just wanted to say," his voice cracked, "that was the most incredible thing I've ever witnessed. You were extraordinary." "Thank you," Kalani said, acutely aware of her mother's presence beside her, of the tension suddenly crackling in the air. Damien's gaze shifted to Monique, and something complicated crossed his face. Regret and longing and grief all tangled together. "Monique, I heard about the surgery. I'm glad you made it through." Monique stared at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet but steady. "You paid for it, didn't you? The medical fund. That was you. It was the least I could do. The least you could do was show up 10 years ago." The words were sharp but not cruel, just honest. "But I suppose late is better than never." Damien flinched. "I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I just want you to know that I'm grateful. Grateful you let me help. Grateful you raised our daughter to be who she is. Grateful you're alive." "Our daughter raised herself," Monique said. "I just tried not to get in her way." "Mama," Kehlani protested, but Monique waved her off. "It's true. You've been grown since you were 8 years old, baby. I just provided the roof and the occasional pep talk." She turned back to Damien. "But she's also kind and forgiving in ways I'm not. So if she decides she wants you in her life, I won't stand in the way. Just know that if you hurt her again, if you make promises you don't keep, if you treat her like an obligation instead of a gift, there won't be anywhere on this planet you can hide from me." The threat was delivered in a voice barely above a whisper, weakened by illness, but absolutely sincere. Damien nodded, understanding exactly what was being said. "I won't hurt her. I promise you that." Promises are easy. Proving them is harder. Monique looked at Kehlani. "Take me home, baby. I'm done for today." Kehlani nodded and started pushing the wheelchair toward the exit, but she paused long enough to look back at Damien. "Thank you for coming. It meant something, having you here. Can I—" He stopped, clearly wrestling with whether to ask. "Can I stay in touch? Not push, not demand, just be available if you ever want to talk?" Kehlani thought about everything that had happened in the past month. The revelation, the fury, the slow thawing of her anger into something more complex. She thought about her mother's words about people changing, about making space for who they might become. "Yeah," she said finally. "You can stay in touch, but on my terms. When I'm ready." Relief flooded Damien's face. "On your terms. Absolutely. Thank you, Kehlani." She nodded and continued toward the exit, leaving him standing in the emptying auditorium, watching them go with an expression that suggested he understood exactly how lucky he was to get even this much. The taxi ride home was quiet, Monique's head resting on Kehlani's shoulder, both of them too exhausted for conversation. When they finally made it back to the apartment, Mrs. Chen helped get Monique settled in the medical bed while Kehlani carefully placed the trophy on the kitchen table where they could both see it. "I still can't believe this is real," Monique said once Mrs. Chen had left, and it was just the two of them again. $50,000. Do you know what this means? That we have options now. That the future isn't just one path anymore." "Exactly." Monique's eyes were closing, exhaustion pulling her under, but she fought it long enough to finish her thought. "You can save some. Use some for school when the time comes. Maybe even take that voice training the judges were talking about. You don't have to spend your childhood worrying about keeping us afloat anymore, Lonnie. You can just be a kid." "I was never really a kid, Mama, not in the way other people are." "I know, and I'm sorry for that. Sorry you had to grow up so fast." Monique's hand found Kehlani's, squeezing weakly. "But maybe now you can slow down a little. Maybe now we both can."
She fell asleep mid-sentence, her breathing evening out into the deep rhythm of medicated rest. Kalani sat beside her for a long time, watching her mother sleep, marveling at how different this moment felt from all the time she'd kept vigil in the hospital. There was peace now instead of terror, hope instead of desperation. Her phone buzzed, a text from Damien. I know I said I'd wait for you to reach out first, but I couldn't let the day end without saying this. I'm proud of you. Not as someone who has any right to claim your accomplishments, but as someone who witnessed what you did tonight and understands how much courage it took. You're going to do extraordinary things, Kehlani. I'm grateful I got to see the beginning of it. She stared at the message for a long time before responding. Thank you. For everything. I mean that. You don't owe me thanks, but I appreciate it anyway. Get some rest. You earned it. Kehlani put the phone away and finally let herself cry. Not sad tears or scared tears, but the kind that came from releasing tension she'd been holding for months. She cried until she was empty, until the weight in her chest had dissolved into something lighter, until she could breathe without feeling like the air was rationed. Then she curled up in the chair beside her mother's bed and fell asleep, the trophy catching moonlight from the window and throwing silver shadows across the walls. The next 3 weeks unfolded in a new rhythm. Monique's recovery was slow but steady. The visiting nurse came less frequently as she grew stronger, and by week 2, Monique could walk from the bed to the bathroom without assistance. By week 3, she was sitting up for meals and making jokes about her surgical scars, and planning her return to work even though everyone told her to slow down. The prize money sat in a new bank account Monique had opened specifically for it, earning interest while they figured out exactly how to use it. Some would go to savings, some to paying down the medical debt that insurance hadn't covered, some toward Kehlani's future education. The exact distribution didn't matter as much as the fact that they had choices now, options they'd never had before. The local news coverage brought unexpected opportunities. A music teacher from a prestigious performing arts school reached out offering a partial scholarship. A children's hospital asked if Kehlani would consider doing regular performances for their young patients. 3 different vocal coaches contacted her with offers of free training. The attention was overwhelming, but Monique helped her sort through it, teaching her to discern genuine opportunities from people trying to exploit her story. Damien kept his distance like he'd promised, but his presence was there in small ways. The Performing Arts School scholarship? Kehlani later learned he'd covered the remaining tuition anonymously. The recording equipment that showed up at their apartment with a note saying it was a competition prize? Too expensive to be from the community center budget. The health insurance upgrade that appeared on Monique's next statement? Somehow connected to the medical assistance fund that kept finding new ways to help. He wasn't trying to buy them. He was trying to build a foundation underneath them without demanding credit, proving through actions that he understood words weren't enough. A month after the competition, Kehlani decided it was time. She texted Damien asking if he wanted to meet for coffee, the same place as before, neutral territory that didn't belong to either of them. He responded within minutes with a simple yes. When? And Kehlani felt something settle in her chest. Not forgiveness, exactly, but willingness, openness, the possibility of something new built on top of the wreckage of what had never been. This time, Monique knew about the meeting. They'd talked about it the night before, sitting together on the couch that had witnessed so many of their important conversations. Are you sure you're ready for this? Monique had asked. I don't know, but I think I need to find out who he is. Not who he was or who I wanted him to be, but who he actually is now. That's very mature of you. I learned from this best. Kehlani had leaned into her mother's shoulder. Are you okay with it? Really? Monique had been quiet for a moment before answering. I spent 10 years being angry at him, and I was justified in that anger. He deserved every bit of it. But anger is exhausting, and I'm tired, and life is too short to spend it holding grudges against people who are genuinely trying to change. So yes, baby, I'm okay with it. More than okay. I think maybe it's time we all moved forward. So Kehlani went to meet her father, because that's what he was, she was starting to accept, even if the words still felt strange in her mouth, with her mother's blessing and her own cautious hope. Damien was already there when she arrived, same table in the back, but
But this time he stood when he saw her and pulled out her chair in a gesture that was awkward but genuine. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," he said as she sat down. "Thank you for not pushing when I needed space."
They ordered drinks, hot chocolate for Kalani, coffee for Damien, and sat in silence for a moment, both trying to figure out where to start.
Finally, Kalani spoke. "I need to understand something. When you left my mom all those years ago, did you know she was pregnant? Did she tell you and you ignored her, or did you just never give her the chance?" Damien's face went pale. "She tried to tell me. She called 17 times, like she told you, left messages, sent emails. And I knew, somewhere deep down, I knew it had to be important or she wouldn't be trying so hard. But I was terrified of what she might want from me, terrified I'd have to choose between the career I was building and the responsibility I wasn't ready for. So I convinced myself it was probably nothing, that she was just being clingy or dramatic or any of the other lies cowards tell themselves to justify cruelty. Did you ever think about her after you stopped answering? Every day.
Every single day for 10 years. I'd wonder where she was, if she was okay, if she hated me. Sometimes I'd pull up old photos and just stare at them, trying to remember what it felt like to be that happy." He swallowed hard. "When I found out about Maya, my other daughter, and realized I'd done this before, abandoned a child before they were even born, it broke something in me. I couldn't live with myself knowing I'd made the same mistake twice. That's when I started looking for your mother. I had to know if she was okay, if there was a child, if I'd destroyed more lives than the one I already knew about. And when you found us, I was terrified. I wanted to reach out, but what was I supposed to say? Sorry, I abandoned you a decade ago. Here's some money to make up for it. It felt obscene, inadequate. So I thought maybe I could help from a distance. Make sure you had opportunities. Make sure your mother had support. Be there without being there, if that makes any sense."
"It doesn't," Kalani said honestly, "but I understand the impulse." Damien leaned forward, his expression intense. "I need you to understand something, Kalani. I'm not trying to replace the childhood I missed. I know I can't. Those years are gone, and that's my fault, my loss, my failure. But I want to be part of what comes next, not as someone trying to make up for the past, but as someone who wants to show up for the future. Whatever that looks like, however you want to define it. What about Maya, your other daughter? We're building something, slowly. She's angry, and she has every right to be, but she's willing to try. We have dinner once a month. She calls when she needs advice. It's not a fairy tale reconciliation, but it's real, and it's ours." He met Kaylani's eyes. "I'd like to have something similar with you if you're willing. Dinners, phone calls, being someone you can count on, even if I'm not someone you call dad." The word hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning neither of them was quite ready to unpack. "I don't know if I'll ever call you that," Kalani said quietly. "It feels like it belongs to someone who was there from the beginning, someone who earned it. I understand, and I'm not asking you to. You can call me Damien. You can call me nothing at all. As long as you're willing to let me try, that's enough." Kalani thought about her mother's words about people changing. She thought about the surgery that had saved Monique's life, the opportunities that had opened up, the foundation that had appeared under their feet when they needed it most. She thought about second chances and earned trust and the difference between demanding forgiveness and working for it. "Okay," she said finally, "we can try. But I need you to understand something too. My mom comes first, always. If there's ever a choice between what's good for me and what's good for your career or your reputation or whatever, I'm choosing her. Every time. I wouldn't want it any other way. Your mother she's remarkable. She raised you alone while battling cancer and working herself to the bone, and she still managed to raise someone kind and talented and strong. I don't expect to compete with that. I just want to support it. Then we have an understanding." Kalani extended her hand across the table, formal and deliberate. "Let's try this. Slow. Careful. No promises except that we'll be honest with each other." Damien took her hand, shaking it solemnly. "Deal." They talked for another hour, the conversation gradually shifting from heavy truths to lighter topics. Damien told her about Maya,
about his work, about the artists he was developing and the music that moved him. Kalani told him about school, about her friends, about the children's hospital performances she'd started doing, and how different it felt to sing for kids who really needed it. When it was time to leave, Damien walked her to the bus stop and waited with her, not because she needed protection, but because it seemed like the right thing to do. As the bus pulled up, he surprised her by pulling an envelope from his jacket pocket. "I was going to wait to give you this, but it feels like the right moment." He handed it to her. "It's not money, just something I thought you should have." Kalani opened the envelope to find a photograph. It was the picture from his phone, him and her mother in that diner booth, young and laughing and completely unaware of what was coming. But this was a printed copy, professionally restored, the colors vibrant and clear. "I had it enhanced," Damien explained. "I thought you might want to see what your mother looked like before everything got hard, before I made it harder." Kalani stared at the image, memorizing the version of her mother she'd never known. Unbroken by illness or exhaustion or single parenthood, just a young woman in love with someone who wasn't ready to love her back. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick. Thank you. You're welcome. And Kalani? That woman in the picture? She's still in there. Under the scars and the fatigue and everything she's survived, she's still that strong and that beautiful and that capable of joy. I hope she gets to remember that someday. The bus doors opened and Kalani climbed aboard, clutching the photograph. As the bus pulled away, she looked back to see Damien still standing at the stop, watching her go, and she felt something shift. Not forgiveness, not yet, but possibility. The possibility that maybe, just maybe, families could be built from broken pieces if everyone was willing to do the work. When she got home, Monique was in the kitchen making dinner, just scrambled eggs and toast, nothing fancy, but it was the first time she'd felt strong enough to cook since the surgery. She looked up as Kalani came in, taking in her daughter's expression with the precision of someone who'd spent 10 years reading every mood and shift. "How did it go?" Kalani set the photograph on the table where her mother could see it. Monique froze, the spatula suspended midair, staring at the image of her younger self. "Where did you get this?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "He had it. Carried it for 10 years, apparently. Had it restored and gave it to me." Monique picked up the photo with trembling hands, and for a moment she was somewhere else, somewhere young and hopeful and not yet broken by the weight of the world. When she looked up, her eyes were wet. "I forgot I used to look like that. Forgot I used to smile like that. Like the future was something to be excited about instead of survived." "You still smile like that. Maybe not as often, but it's still there. I've seen it." "When?" "When you watch me sing, when Mrs. Chen tells terrible jokes, when the doctor said the surgery got everything." Kalani moved to stand beside her mother, looking at the photograph together. "You're still her, Mama. Still strong, still beautiful, still fighting." Monique pulled Kalani close, and they stood like that in the kitchen while the eggs got cold and the toast burned slightly, and neither of them cared. After a moment, Monique spoke quietly. "Are you going to have a relationship with him, with Damien?" "I think so, if that's okay with you." "It's more than okay. It's good. You deserve to know where you come from, all of it, not just the parts I could give you." She pulled back, wiping her eyes. "Just promise me something. Anything. Don't let him, or anyone, make you forget what you already know, that you're enough exactly as you are, that you don't need his approval or his industry connections or his money to be extraordinary. You already are. You always have been." "I promise, Mama." They finished making dinner together, and that night they ate scrambled eggs and burnt toast while looking at the photograph of a younger, different version of their family. It wasn't the family either of them had imagined, but it was real, and it was theirs, and it was starting to feel like maybe that was enough. Over the next 6 months, a new normal emerged. Monique completed her chemotherapy, each session taking less out of her than the last as her body grew stronger. By month 4, she was back at work part-time. By month 6, she was healthy enough that the oncologist used words like remission and long-term survival that had seemed impossible before. Kalani started at the Performing Arts School with the scholarship Damien had helped arrange, though she continued to live at home and take the bus every day because she wasn't ready to leave her mother yet. She made new friends who understood the language of music, who could talk about breath control and emotional storytelling, and the difference between singing technically well and singing truthfully. She kept performing at the Children's Hospital every other Saturday morning, singing for kids who were fighting battles bigger than any 10-year-old should have to face. Some of them got better. Some of them didn't. But all of them smiled when she sang, and that was enough to keep her coming back. Her relationship with Damien grew slowly, built on monthly dinners and occasional phone calls, and the understanding that trust wasn't given but earned, inch by painful inch. He met Maya eventually, his 2 daughters having lunch together with an awkwardness that gradually softened into something like sisterhood. Maya was sharp and funny and angry in productive ways, and she taught Kalani that having complicated feelings about their father wasn't a betrayal. It was just honest. Brenda Carlisle sent a formal letter of apology 6 months after the competition, explaining that she'd been wrong to judge Kalani based on appearances and assumptions. She'd been removed from her volunteer coordinator position after a recording of her interaction with Kalani somehow made its way to the organizing committee, and she was working on examining her own biases. The apology was sincere but unnecessary. Kalani had stopped thinking about Brenda weeks after the finals, too busy building her future to dwell on people who'd tried to limit it. The prize money, carefully managed, became the foundation for stability they'd never had. Monique was able to cut back to 1 job instead of 2. They moved to a better apartment in a safer neighborhood, one with an elevator that worked and hallway lights that didn't flicker. Kalani's college fund grew steadily. The constant anxiety of financial precarity didn't disappear entirely, but it loosened its grip, giving them room to breathe. 1 year after the competition, the community center held its next talent show. Kalani attended as a guest of honor, sitting in the audience instead of competing, watching nervous kids take the stage with dreams bigger than their circumstances. During intermission, she found herself standing in the lobby where it had all started, staring at the spot where Brenda had spilled her quarters. Quite a difference a year makes, doesn't it? She turned to find the head judge from the finals, the vocal coach who'd given her that 9.8. The woman smiled, gesturing to the auditorium where kids were warming up for the second half. "Do you ever think about competing again?" she asked. "No, that chapter's closed." Kalani looked back at the stage, visible through the open doors. "But I think about coming back to help. Maybe mentoring kids who are where I was, giving them someone who understands what it's like to need this to be more than just a hobby. That would be remarkable. The world needs more people who remember where they came from. I don't think I could forget if I tried." The second half of the show featured a girl who reminded Kalani of herself. Too thin, too nervous, wearing a dress that was clearly borrowed and singing like her life depended on it. When she finished, the applause was warm but not overwhelming. The judges scored her fairly but not generously. Kalani found the girl afterward backstage in that same holding area where she'd once sat alone and terrified. "Hey, you were really good out there." The girl looked up, eyes widening in recognition. "You're Kalani Brooks. You won last year." "I did. And I saw something in you tonight that I recognized. You weren't just performing, you were fighting for something." The girl's eyes filled with tears. "My dad needs surgery. The prize money would help." "I know. I understand exactly how that feels." Kalani pulled out one of the business cards the performing arts school had made for her, a ridiculous luxury that still made her uncomfortable but that she carried anyway. "If you want someone to practice with, someone who gets it, give me a call. No charge, no strings, just one singer helping another." The girl took the card with shaking hands. "Why would you do that?" "Because someone helped me when I needed it, and because talent like yours shouldn't be wasted just because circumstances are hard." Kalani smiled. "You've got something real. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." She left the girl holding that card like it was a lifeline, and as Kalani walked out of the community center into the cool evening air, she felt the circle completing. She'd been that desperate kid. Now she was becoming someone who could help desperate kids. The transformation felt significant in ways she couldn't quite articulate. Her phone buzzed, a text from Damien. "Heard you were at the talent show tonight. How did it feel being on the other side?" "Strange." "Good. Like I'm starting to understand what comes after survival. I'm proud of you, for everything you're becoming." "Thanks. That means something." Family dinner next week? Maya wants to try this new Thai place downtown. My treat. Kalani smiled at the word family, still unfamiliar, but gradually becoming comfortable. Yeah, sounds good. I'll bring Mom if she's feeling up to it. Even better. See you then. She put the phone away and started walking toward the bus stop where her mother was waiting in their new car, a used Honda that Monique had saved up for after getting her first full paycheck post-recovery. They were going home to their new apartment, to the life they'd built from quarters and determination and the refusal to give up even when giving up would have been easier. The future stretched out ahead of them, uncertain but no longer terrifying. Kalani was learning to sing not because she needed to save anyone, but because music was her language, her gift, her joy. Monique was learning to rest without feeling guilty, to accept help without feeling weak, to imagine years instead of months. And Damien was learning what it meant to show up consistently, to prove trustworthiness through action rather than declaration, to build relationships from foundation stones of honesty instead of obligation. None of it was perfect. There were still hard days when Monique's fatigue made her snappish, when Kalani's anxiety about money resurfaced despite their improved circumstances, when Damien tried too hard and had to be gently reminded to back off. But they were building something real from the broken pieces of what had never been, and that was enough. 3 years later, when Kalani performed at Carnegie Hall as part of a youth showcase, her voice stronger and more controlled but still carrying that raw authenticity that had won her first competition, both her mother and her father were in the audience. Monique in the front row where she'd always been, cancer-free for 2 years and counting. Damien in the back, respecting the hierarchy they'd established, but present nonetheless, his phone recording every second because he'd missed too much already and refused to miss any more. When Kalani took her bow to thunderous applause, she looked at her mother first, as she always did, as she always would, and saw pride and love and the fierce joy of a woman who'd fought impossible battles and won. Then she looked toward the back, finding Damien's face in the crowd, and nodded once. An acknowledgement, a thank you, a recognition that families came in all shapes, including ones that had been shattered and slowly, carefully glued back together. After the performance, they had dinner together, Monique, Kalani, Damien, and Maya, at a restaurant that none of them could have afforded 3 years ago, but that felt appropriate for celebrating milestones. They laughed and argued about the performance's technical merits, and told stories that were starting to accumulate, building a shared history where before there had only been absence. At one point, Maya leaned over and whispered to Kalani, "This is weird, right? All of us together like this?" "Extremely weird," Kalani agreed. "But also kind of nice?" "Yeah, kind of nice." That night, as Kalani and Monique rode home together in their Honda, still used, still making concerning noises when it turned left, but theirs and paid for and reliable, Monique spoke into the comfortable silence. "You know what I realized tonight?" "What, Mama?" "We made it. Through everything that tried to break us, every obstacle and heartbreak and impossible choice, we made it to the other side. And we did it together. We had help. We did, but we also fought like hell. Don't forget that part, baby. Don't forget that we were strong enough to survive even before anyone showed up to support us. I won't forget. I promise." Kalani kept that promise. Years later, when she was accepting awards and signing recording contracts and building a career that had started in a hospital stairwell, she never forgot where she'd come from. She mentored young singers from difficult backgrounds. She performed at children's hospitals until the day she became too famous for the intimate settings. She donated to medical assistance funds and talent competitions and programs that gave kids like her a fighting chance. And every single time she stepped onto a stage, whether it was a community center or Carnegie Hall, or eventually stadiums that held tens of thousands, she carried two things with her: the memory of her mother's face in the front row of that first competition, crying and believing and refusing to give up hope, and a coffee tin full of quarters that she kept in her dressing room as a reminder of what it felt like to fight for something with everything you had. The tin was empty now, the quarters long since spent on a registration fee that had changed everything. But it sat there anyway, a monument to the girl she'd been and the woman she'd become, to the journey from desperate hope to earned triumph, to the truth that sometimes survival itself was the greatest victory. And when young singers asked her how she'd made it, how she'd overcome impossible odds to build this life, Kalani would tell them the truth. That it wasn't just talent, it wasn't just luck. It was showing up even when you were terrified, fighting even when you were tired, singing even when you weren't sure anyone was listening. It was the willingness to be vulnerable in front of judges and cameras and crowds who might reject you. It was the courage to accept help from unexpected places, to let people prove they'd changed, to believe that your story didn't have to be defined by what you'd lost, but could be shaped by what you refused to give up. Most of all, it was love. Love for the people who needed you, and for the art that saved you, and for the future that seemed impossible until suddenly it wasn't. That was the story Kalani Brooks carried with her, written in quarters and coffee tins, in hospital waiting rooms and community center stages, in the distance between abandonment and reconciliation, in the space between desperation and hope. It was a story about a girl who fought to save her mother's life and ended up saving her own. And it was a story that, even after everything, was still being written.